Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if Deku became someone new part 1. If you guys enjoy this what if and want to see part 2, comment down below. And let me know before I start. Please do support for more awesome content and leave a like. And don't forget to subscribe to my channel. And also share this video with your friends and check out the description in my playlist. The author of the story 𝗧𝗵𝗲 𝗔𝗂𝘁𝗵𝗲 from fanfiction. So let's start the video. Boom, I warned you about this, a voice roared over the deafening sound of a huge explosion that blew the door to the 𝐻𝐸, a support course workshop on the outside. The explosion had caught someone off guard. 𝗧𝗑𝗵𝗲 𝗔𝗂𝘁𝗵𝗲 had been on his way to this exact same place to resolve some issues. But to have the door blast open and him being hit with the force of flying debris. Well, he wasn't expecting that. Midoriya and Uraraka yelled out in concern for their friend. The boy groaned and raised his arm up to signify he was okay. Bakugo hit way harder than that. Wait, what's this? Weight? He asked himself, feeling something on top of him. He heard a small sound, and the weight moved. The person groaned a bit, and then locked eyes with him. Oh hey, didn't see ya there, she said in a cheery voice. However, Izuku wasn't really paying attention, for his eyes had now landed elsewhere. BB boobs. He screamed internally, feeling the warm, soft mounds pressing into his chest. He shakily tried to move her off him, and was actually surprised that she didn't get the hint. He was successful, and shifted her weight off him. And she sat up with a sheepish grin on her face. Sorry about the explosion. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 here is still not fully aware of the danger her inventions are capable of. Power Loader said, making his way out of the room. Izuku greeted him and reassured them that it was fine. His two friends helped him up, asking if he was okay. I was just caught off guard, he said with a small chuckle. Meanwhile, Power Loader had given his student an earful. But unfortunately, it didn't seem to faze her. Izuku, however, could see something else behind the smile she had plastered on her face. There was disappointment and frustration. He should know he did that all the time. Maybe he could talk to her. When he was done with what he came to do, it didn't take long, as he was there to submit a new design for his hero costume. You guys can go ahead. I have something to take care of, he said to his friends. Well, okay, well, see you tomorrow, Midoriya replied. And Uraraka waved as they both left. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 was still fiddling with some things and didn't notice that she wasn't alone in the room. Hello. 𝗧𝗵𝗲. She spun around, hearing an unfamiliar yet familiar voice, and saw Izuku standing at the doorway. She smiled and waved at him. He smiled back and stepped inside over to where she was busy with what she was tinkering with. What are you doing here? Forgot something? She asked as she faced her work and continued. Izuku gulped a bit, not knowing how to start and questioning whether he should even go ahead with it. After all, he didn't know her, and it would be rude if he just jumped into conclusions on how she was feeling. Well, I just wanted to see if you were okay after all that, he said nervously, looking down at the floor. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 observed him with a small smile and spoke up. I'm not gonna bite you, It's just I get that feeling too, the feeling of not being good enough. That's what that look was about, right? He asked suddenly, and she dropped what she was doing and turned to him as her smile dropped and was replaced with a look of surprise. You're quite perceptive. I'll give you that, she said with a lower tone. No one had ever seen through her facade before, at least that she was aware of. He just hit the nail square in the head. Sorry if I just said that out of the blue. I know I'm a stranger you just met today, and I understand if you think I'm weird. I just wanted to make sure you were fine, Izuku said, making his way towards the door. Hey, 𝗧𝗵𝗲 called after him. Izuku stopped and turned to her. What, thank you, and may 𝗧𝗵𝗲 by the way, she said with a bright smile. Izuku Midoriya. The boy replied with a smile of his own before leaving the room. He seems interesting. Maybe he can help me with my babies, she thought to herself before shrugging and going back to her work. Help was an understatement. Izuku was basically her guinea pig. He was bent over, squeezed, stretched in all ways possible by her inventions. Though there were a few of them that didn't malfunction, at least not immediately. Izuku could see how determined she was to get better at becoming an inventor, and in many ways could see similarities between the both of them. They were both stubborn as hell and would keep trying even after countless failures. It was something he came to cherish in his new friend, and as a bonus, some of her inventions had actually helped him in his hero career. The biggest one, however, was the idea of using his legs instead of his arms. He was genuinely shocked at how he never thought of it. And well, he did have to endure a few weeks' worth of taunting from May. They had become very good friends over their first year, and with Izuku being her personal assistantist subject, her work drastically improved. Gone were the days of constant explosions. But now her inventions were now even being used by actual pros. May had also gotten a scholarship with a major support item company, where she would have a guaranteed job in the company after her education. She honestly didn't know how her luck changed so much. But she knew it all started when a certain green-haired boy came into her life, 𝗧𝗂, and she hadn't seen in a while, almost 2 years actually. But they still kept in touch. She did fear for him when he fought all for one, and was happy and relieved that he was okay after the fight. The heroes had finally won and defeated the villain, and society was gradually going back to how it was before. 𝗧𝗂 was now the #1 hero. And with that came the adoration, the fame, money, and worse, fangirls. Maybe she was overreacting. But it always rubbed her the wrong way when she saw him on the TV being interviewed, only to be swarmed by screaming girls. One time she even smashed her remote, which made her question why she was so annoyed by that. May wasn't dumb. She knew why, but didn't want to accept it. Fat chance he even sees me that way anyways, she said with a sigh, further sinking into her bathtub, leaving only her bubblegum pink hair on the surface. 𝗧𝗂 was too busy for romance anyways, as he had pointed out numerous times. At one point, he even had to turn down his friend Uraraka. But they were cool now, and she heard that she was now dating Ida. It was a bit of a surprise, but May felt a little relieved. The skies of California were lit up by the thousands of lights that shimmered from the towering buildings. America was certainly everything she expected. But in all honesty, she missed home. There was one problem, though: she didn't have family that she could visit back in Japan. And she was completely swamped with work here. Maybe I can just transfer back, she said to no one in particular. May did just that, and the very next day asked for a transfer back to Japan. Seeing as she was their most important figure, they quickly agreed and did the necessary paperwork. It would be a little surprise to her friends back in Japan, and she couldn't wait to reunite with them and a certain green-haired hero XXX. So Mr. Midoriya, the question most of the people here are asking is, are you single? 𝗧𝗂 gulped, and then rubbed the back of his head nervously. The woman sitting across from him had a mischievous glint in her eyes. Like with most women he came across, he couldn't remember how many times he had answered this question. Well, yeah, he finally answered, and sighed at the wave of murmurs that followed his answer. He knew what was coming next, and was hoping he would soon be done with the interview. Finally he was let go and went out to meet Shoto waiting for him. How'd it go, he asked with a small smirk. What do you think? 𝗧𝗂 replied with a sigh. Shoto chuckled at his friend's dilemma. You know, there's really only one way to put all this to bed, he spoke up. 𝗧𝗂 nodded, understanding what he meant by that. But there was one problem. I don't have any luck when it comes to girls, he said. Shoto gave him an incredulous look, like seriously, did he not look around? 𝗧𝗂 could sense his friend's reaction. He didn't mean it literally, but the one person he would even consider was not even around anymore. It would take some kind of miracle or absurd string of luck if she were to just magically appear. Cue magical appearance. He froze in place, eyes widened in shock, leaning across a car, bubblegum pink hair as messy as he last remembered, and the dark circles around her eyes that showed how many sleepless nights she had spent working were as pronounced as ever. Hey 𝗧𝗂, it's been quite some time, May, 𝗧𝗂 exclaimed, hugging the young woman tightly. Surprising Shoto at the speed he moved at the ice user just smirked and went in his own direction, leaving the two to themselves. Dude, I'm not made of iron. You're crushing me, she wheezed out. 𝗧𝗂 let her go and apologized with a small chuckle. Yeah, sorry, I just wasn't expecting to see you, he said. I just transferred back to Japan. I got a little homesick, she admitted, scratching at the back of her head. 𝗧𝗂 smiled at her. That's quite a surprise. May wanted to go somewhere and catch up, but 𝗧𝗂 refused and insisted that she went to rest, much to her ire. You seriously need a few more days, and you'll be looking like a raccoon, he stated. May just sighed and was gently shoved back into the car. Please, make sure she doesn't do anything at all, 𝗧𝗂 said to her assistant. The woman nodded, and May in frustration stuck out her middle finger at 𝗧𝗂, surprising him at the gesture. Must be an American thing, he thought to himself. He then looked back to see that Shoto was gone, and just like he was watching, his name popped on 𝗧𝗂's screen. Shoto, I left a while ago, didn't want to interrupt what you had going on there. Wink, he sighed, and messaged him back. 𝗧𝗂, it's not what you think. Shoto, at least not yet. Wink. 𝗧𝗂, okay, enough with the winks. Shoto wink. He put his phone away and facepalmed, wondering how he was the single one among them. Life was seriously unpredictable. XXX. It had been a while since May moved back to Japan, and it was like she never left. She had now caught up with her friends and had yet to resume work. Seeing as most of her work stuff was being moved to the country, she wasn't used to having so much free time on her hands, and most of the time was spent drawing out blueprints, lying around, or do something with 𝗧𝗂, which was the thing she always looked forward to. Whatever they did, she had fun so long as it was with 𝗧𝗂. May had taken the step in hinting at how she felt towards him, but she was sure that 𝗧𝗂 wasn't going to get the message. She was probably wrong, though contrary to what she thought, 𝗧𝗂 was well aware of their situation. After all, he had seen that countless times before, and he wasn't as naive as he was when he was younger. It was what currently kept her occupied as she was going through a file, and as a result of her not paying attention let it slip from her hands and fell, but Izuku caught it with his quirk. "You seem out of it. Anything wrong?" he asked with a raised eyebrow. "Yeah." "Well, no, actually something is wrong." She admitted maybe she should just tell him, because it was proving to be too big a distraction. And she didn't want that while she was working. "Can you tell me about it?" Izuku asked, curiously wondering. "If it was finally time, I don't think Yao'd understand. I've been feeling a certain way for a long time. But the person I feel that way towards probably is oblivious to it. And it's frustrating because I don't want to ruin anything we have going on." Izuku listened with interest, his eyes gaining a mischievous glint. And he spoke up just as she went silent. "I know, May, and I feel the same way for a long time. That's why I haven't been able to get a girlfriend after all this time. I only had my eye on you," he said with a smile. "You're serious?" "This isn't a prank?" May asked with wide eyes. "No, it's not. I love you, May," he said in a firm tone. Boom. The two of them were thrown back as one of her gadgets blew up. Neither of them paid attention to that, however, as she looked down at him, and they both leaned into each other, kissing. They broke apart, but then leaned in again, this time taking even longer. They both panted heavily, staring at each other, and smiled. "A lab wasn't where I pictured this happening," Izuku said with a small laugh. "I think it's perfect. This was the way we first met," May said. Speaking of which, Izuku clearly remembered that day, and his eyes trailed down her unbuttoned shirt and right at her slightly exposed breasts. May pressed them against him. "Like what you see, Izuku? Definitely. We meet again. Boobs. BZZT. BZZT. BZZT." The incessant ringing of an alarm clock woke up our protagonist, and he slowly opened his eyes because as much as he wanted to ignore it, shutting out the booming voice of All Might was basically impossible. He groaned and slowly got up, his eyes getting used to the light that came in through the cracks of the window curtain. A small noise got his attention, and he turned over to his side face to face with someone. And that someone was asleep. "Wait, ga!" Izuku screamed, but very quickly covered his mouth, lest he wake her up. He analyzed his situation, trying to get his bearings. Why was there a girl in his bed? He was panicking. Then the memories hit him, and he gave a sheepish chuckle. "Oh yeah, I guess I forgot." The girl moved around a little, and opened her eyes, looking straight at him. Gray met emerald green, and she smiled softly at him. Izuku scratched the back of his head and smiled back. "Good morning, Ryoiko." Ryoiko sat up slowly and yawned, popping a few of her joints and sighing in satisfaction. "Good morning, Izuku. Guessing you forgot about yesterday." Izuku nodded, and for some moments they both said nothing but listened to the patter of rain on the roof of the dorms. Izuku then spoke up. "So, how did you end up here?" Ryoiko smiled a bit, turning to face him, and he really couldn't handle how cute she looked. Izuku's face flushed red, and he looked down. Her smile took a mischievous glint, and she scooted over closer to him. "You're staring, Izuku," she whispered to him. "Stop teasing me," the green-haired boy protested, making her giggle at his expense. Today was a Saturday, meaning they didn't have to go to school. Izuku may not have remembered what happened, but she did not that she leaned into him, and he hugged her softly, keeping his hands on her midsection. Ryoiko sighed and made a small sound when his fingers touched her stomach. The weather was cold, something that the both of them loved. Izuku's alarm from his phone chimed up, indicating that it was time for his morning workout. However, as he was about to leave, Ryoiko grabbed onto his hand. Not wanting him to leave, seriously, he asked with a raised eyebrow. Ryoiko just pulled him back and snuggled into him, closing her eyes and wrapping her legs around him. Izuku just chuckled and closed his eyes as well. Maybe one day of missing his morning routine wouldn't hurt. He could make up for it later. Ryoiko was already half asleep again, put at ease at how soft Izuku's body was and the gentle rainfall. She wanted to get as much of her boyfriend as she could before Monday, because as students of UA, they spent a good chunk of their time doing schoolwork or training, so weekends were a nice getaway. Izuku, who was still awake, used his fingers to play with her soft silver hair. His index finger slightly grazed her ear, and she made another cute sound. Izuku smirked to himself. He just found a sensitive spot for a moment. He thought about his situation and how life seemed to do a complete 180 after he got one for all. Funny enough, getting a girlfriend was a goal that was above even mastering one for all in difficulty, especially for him. But here he was. A small gust of wind made her press harder into him, burying her face in his chest. Izuku's poor heart couldn't handle it. He would keep her at all costs. The world be damned. And soon enough Monday arrived. The students tiredly went about their day, going through different classes, and eventually lunch break came as usual. UA's cafeteria was as crowded as a zoo, students of varying classes struggling to get their meals. Izuku watched the chaos with a bit of amusement as he looked on at the new batch of first years that were trying to find their way through the school, most being overwhelmed by the competition just to get food. What's gotten you so gassed? Izuku turned to see Bakugo sit down across from him, and Shoto came up a few seconds after the blonde. "The first years they seem swamped out there," he said with a small laugh. The other two seemed to share his sentiment, and actually turned to see the chaos occurring just behind them. They were joined by some of their other classmates, and they all shared a nice moment at the expense of their underclassmen. That was unfortunately the only time they actually got to smile that day, as a gruesome battle simulation was organized by Aizawa, who had also given them a prior pop quiz. Needless to say, they had had enough of UA for one day. And as soon as the final bell rung, they literally bolted out of the class away from the school grounds. Izuku, however, took a detour to the school library. He showed his card to the librarian and was allowed in. Inside, he looked around for a certain someone, but he couldn't spot her anywhere. He then felt two small hands on his back, and for a moment was startled. But he smiled as he felt her press against him from behind. "Hey Izuku, glad I could find you here. I was actually going to return a book," Izuku said with a smile. Rieko let him go and picked up the books that she was taking with her. The both of them left the library, and on the way they both talked about their respective days at school. Izuku glanced at his girlfriend, and a thought came to his mind. Rieko wasn't known for her expressive nature. It was quite the opposite, actually. She was basically invisible until she either spoke up or did something to gain attention, which was pretty rare in itself. However, with him, she was different. US Ghost Girl was open and talkative with him. She had a different side to her when she was alone with him, and selfishly, he didn't want anyone else to see that part of her. Rieko seemed to sense his thoughts, something that she seemed very good at. Maybe it was a part of her quirk or something. They made their way to the dorms and stopped in front of the Class B dorms. She gave Izuku a soft kiss and waved. "I'll see you later, Izuku." Izuku smiled and waved back, then headed for his own dorm. On the way, he thought, "My girlfriend is really cute. XXX Class 2A were barely hanging on to their sanity in the heat of present Mike's grammar class." The man would not just stop talking, and worse, it was English. And he was an extremely demonstrative person by nature. The class would have certainly been lively if they weren't completely burnt out. Izuku was one to usually pay attention in class, but today was different. Even Momo was struggling to keep track of what their teacher was saying. Eventually, the man's class came to an end, which was some few hours after school had actually closed. The class just tiredly headed towards their dorms to have a well-deserved rest. Izuku got to his room and walked into a sight he could get used to seeing. Rieko sat on his bed with her eyes closed, but he could tell she was awake. He didn't even question how she got inside. Frankly, he didn't care. All he wanted to do was to squish her and fall asleep after a shower, which he took. They both had their homework there, and as they say, two heads are better than one. Where he had problems, she would help out, and he would do the same. Finally, Izuku exclaimed, throwing his book to the side and flopping on his back. Rieko stifled a laugh at his antics and neatly placed her books on the desk. With little effort, she slid into his frame, sighing at the warmth that his body provided. Being the small spoon had its advantages. Izuku playfully slid his finger over her ear and got the reaction that he wanted. The last time he did this, she was asleep. Rieko's breaths became heavier and her voice smaller. Really sensitive there," she squeaked as he did it again. It seemed she had enough of the teasing and rolled over, straddling him. Her gray eyes were cloudy with something. Izuku was no woman expert, but he wasn't dumb. He probably touched her one time too many. It wasn't as if he too was off the hook, as his own body soon caught up. Small Might had woken up and joined the conversation. Rieko smirked as the red hue on his face grew with each passing second. Then she suddenly rolled off him and giggled. "Now we're even." Izuku blinked. "Wait, then what am I gonna do with this? Y'all think of something. Or would you prefer if I handled it myself?" she asked with a mischievous grin. Izuku rolled his eyes. Inside, he probably deserved that. "Fine, you win this round," he admitted with a laugh. "What should I get? Maybe this one?" Izuku asked no one in particular, as he was contemplating on his current situation. He wanted to get a limited edition vintage All Might figurines that had just been released, and was stumped at making his decision. Both were extremely hard to come across, and he only had money for one. There were few things Izuku actually liked. Unlike what most would assume with him, he was however too polite to actually show his dislike for some things his friends did. "Guess I'll just take this one," he said, finally making his choice, and paid for it. The main reason he didn't get both was because he had also bought an action figure of himself. Yeah, it quite surprising, but he was currently one of, if not the most famous student in the country. It had been a few months since the truth of One for All had spread to the population, and understandably so. He was overwhelmed by the excessive wave of attention. How All Might managed to live like that, he didn't know. Though thankfully everyone calmed down, and he could live normally at the very least. He looked to his phone and almost dropped it, seeing the time. It was almost curfew, and Aizawa didn't take too kindly to late coming, probably an entire week's worth of homework as punishment. Just great. As if it couldn't get worse, a female voice said in an annoyed tone. Izuku's ears perked up hearing that, but seeing as he was late, and it wasn't his business anyways, frankly, he didn't really care. He decided to simply walk past and pretend he didn't see her. Hey, he turned with a small sigh, a bit annoyed that she spotted him. What? He asked in a weirdly firm tone. It seemed to surprise her a bit. You certainly don't sound like you look, she said with a small chuckle. Izuku raised an eyebrow, as he didn't recognize her, and plus talking to a random girl on the street was the last thing he wanted to be doing right now. Is there something I can help you with? If not, I really have to get going, he said again with the same tired tone. The girl stepped forward and Izuku's slightly annoyed facial expression turned into one of shock. Then completely red. You're the crazy girl from the provisional license exams, he yelled, taking a step back. The girl laughed at his reaction. Well, not exactly. The person you saw there wasn't actually me. I recognized you and wanted to say hi and to apologize for what happened, she explained. Oh well. If that's the case, then you don't have to apologize. It was not your fault, Izuku replied, and then looked away. She noticed this and voiced out her curiosity. What's gotten you all jittery? Izuku couldn't bring himself to tell her out loud that he basically saw her butt naked, so he whispered it to her, and she also had a similar reaction, now feeling a little self-conscious about herself. I mean, he literally saw everything. An awkward silence fell between them, and then she finally opened her mouth to say something. Oh. Yeah, I should probably get going. Have a good day, Izuku said, and began walking away, turning back to her one last time, and leaving in a hurry. There was something no one knew, and something he had never told anyone before. He never did forget what he saw, and while he wasn't on the level of Minato or Kaminari, he was still a boy with hormones. He couldn't count the amount of times when that image had popped up randomly, and he would then feel shame about it. The most terrifying part of it all was that he'd get all bricked up at the thought, and well, he had to do something about, and let's just say he wasn't really proud of what he had to do. Well, that was weird, the girl said as she took to her own path. She didn't feel any ill intent from him, but the way he looked at her, she really did believe he wasn't joking when he said what he said. Well, regardless, they would not see each other again. XXX, screw my luck. Oh no, Izuku said with a sigh as once again he ran into the one person he didn't want to. Her in his own school, at that. Like, what the hell was she even doing there? They both stood there awkwardly, with Uraraka and Ida giving looks of confusion. Why are you in you? Izuku asked, genuinely confused. We have a special training program that is taking place here for third-year students, another voice cut in as a tall boy with short black hair said, walking over to them. The three US students tilted their heads in recognition, but the boy introduced himself regardless. I am Inasai Yoshi. It's a pleasure to meet you again under friendly circumstances, he said, bowing. And 𝗵𝗃𝗄𝗎 𝗧𝗵𝗲, nice to meet you, the girl said with a small bow, to which the students returned the courtesy. After the introductions, Izuku excused himself and left with the rest, looking a bit confused as to why he left. Well, except 𝗵𝗃𝗄𝗎 school didn't go too well that day for Izuku. He kept getting distracted, and Aizawa took note of it and gave him a small talk to set him straight. Izuku thanked him and exited the teacher's faculty room, only to run into the Shiksu students once again. He facepalmed mentally. Don't say anything, Izuku, just walk away, he said to himself, and did just that. He walked past them without saying a single word, but made eye contact with 𝗵𝗃𝗄𝗎. She also didn't say anything, as that her lips curled up in amusement. Her previous feeling of shame had been replaced with mischief and curiosity, and her natural tendency to tease people. The little game of cat and mouse continued. Of course, Izuku was the mouse in this situation. He was trying to keep his distance from the girl, and even went as far as going out his usual walking patterns, just to avoid her. It did annoy 𝗵𝗃𝗄𝗎, but at the same time it felt like she was cornering him with each passing day. He could only avoid her for so long, and they had about a month at US, so that was plenty of time. As for Izuku, he didn't understand her sudden interest in him, and wanted nothing more than for her to leave him alone. It wasn't that he didn't like her, but every time he saw her, it's like she wasn't wearing anything to him. That image kept coming back. Well, it wasn't her, but he couldn't help that he was bothered by it. After a while, he wasn't getting jumped by her again, and he thought it was all clear until one day when he was least expecting. As he was walking back to the dorms, he was suddenly pulled aside and groaned, seeing 𝗵𝗃𝗄𝗎. What, he asked with a raised eyebrow. Do you hate me? 𝗵𝗃𝗄𝗎 suddenly asked. He looked confused. Why would you think that? Izuku replied. 𝗵𝗃𝗄𝗎 shrugged. For starters, you've been avoiding me like the plague, so my question wasn't so far-fetched, she said in a matter-of-fact voice. Izuku looked down, not really knowing how to put it, but he thought she at least deserved an answer, so he whispered it to her. And her eyes widened in surprise, and a small blush appeared on her face. "You really did that?" she asked, covering her face. "Not knowing how to feel. Yeah, sorry about that. I know it's not something I should say," Izuku replied with a sigh. "I'm not mad or bothered by it. I'm actually quite flattered. If I'm being honest," Kami said with a smile. Izuku looked confused and eyed her a bit. "I'd be lying if I said that's normal." Kami giggled in response. "I've heard that a lot. Nothing new to me." After that, they seemed to break the ice between them and actually got to know each other better. Izuku was slowly beginning to come around and was more used to her out there personality. Being someone who was naturally reserved, he had a hard time adapting. But eventually, he saw that she really was a fun person to be around. If you could live with the constant teasing. Izuku and Kami's unlikely friendship continued for a while, but both could tell there was some unspoken tension between them, and it wasn't exactly love, rather something a bit more. Dirty Izuku would steal glances at her when they were near each other, and even when she noticed, she did nothing. In fact, she would actually go out of her way to get him to notice her, which from the results showed that her plan was working. Soon enough, the joint school program came to an end, and the Shiksu third-year class had to return to their school. "Hey Izuku, hand me your phone," Kami said, walking up to him. Sure," the boy replied, giving her his phone. She typed in something and gave it back to him. "I'll call you K." Izuku watched her classmates and waved at her with a small smile. "I see you've made a new friend. Nice." One kid, the voice of Aizawa, spoke up beside him. Izuku jumped a bit, as he didn't notice the man before, I guess, so he said shyly. Aizawa chuckled very lightly and turned towards the school. "Let's head back," he said over his shoulder. The both of them went back into the school, with Izuku heading for the dorms. His second year at UA was nothing like his first. It was much smoother, probably because they didn't have to worry about crazy villains attacking them left and right. They could have a normal year as students, and he really welcomed the change. All throughout this time, he kept in touch with Kami, who visited from time to time. She was now working at a hero agency, as Shiksu graduated their third years earlier than most schools. They usually met outside the school, and on some few occasions she'd come over to the dorms. Of course, none of Izuku's classmates knew about that. If they did, it'd blow the entire situation out of proportion. Their relationship had taken a more wholesome turn, and now wasn't solely based on sexual tension, and both sides could say they had feelings for the other. But who would break first? It became somewhat of a game, seeing who would confess first. That night, both of them were in Izuku's room, watching something on the boy's laptop. Kami was already pretty tired from a long day's work, and was nestled against him as his arms were around her midsection. "Izuku," she called, suddenly gaining his attention. "Him. What do you make of this situation?" she asked softly, rubbing against his hands. Izuku was quiet for a few seconds, pondering on what to say. But he got his answer. "I think we're both being stubborn," he said with a small laugh. Kami giggled too. "So, hypothetically, if I were to ask you out," Izuku started. "I'd say yes." Izuku was a bit surprised at how quickly she answered him, and he smiled. "Okay, then so will you be my girlfriend officially?" "Of course, dummy," she said, pushing him down and kissing him. Izuku rolled them over so he was on top and looked down at her, his eyes gaining a subtle glow. Kami's eyes narrowed mischievously. "You don't have to hold back anymore, Izu. Go ahead," she purred in a soft tone. "You sure will. It's nothing you haven't seen before. Now you get to do more than just seeing," she said in a sultry tone. Izuku smirked at her and leaned in to kiss her again, pinning her hands to both sides of her head. That, friends, is where this not-so-wholesome story ends. And they both did what they always wanted to do. Screw like rabbits. I fucking hate this nerd, Katsuki thought as she glared at the scene before her, the source of her apparent annoyance. Izuku Midoriya, who was talking during lunch with his friends Ida Uraraka and Shoto. He seemed so content, so happy, and for some reason it pissed her off. "You might want to chill out a bit. Your growling is getting pretty loud." Another voice spoke up from behind her. Katsuki turned to see her pink classmate Mina Ashido and Kirishima, who was watching with a raised eyebrow. She didn't say anything as they both sat down next to her, but silently went back to her food. "So how's the sightseeing going?" Mina asked, making her look up from her food. "What do you mean by that?" Katsuki asked, narrowing her eyes. "Well, you seem to like staring at Midoriya with murderous intent." At that, Kirishima said with a nervous chuckle, "It's either you really want to kill him or—" The statement just hung in the air between them until Katsuki picked up what she was implying. "Hell no, don't even think about it," she growled with small explosions popping from her palms. "It's not far-fetched, Bakugo. I'm pretty sure everyone knows by now, well, except Midoriya," Kirishima added with a shrug. If she was gonna blow him up, then fine. Katsuki sighed and closed her eyes, then calmed herself down. "Just drop it." The two just shrugged and left that matter where it was and talked about other stuff. They were joined by Shiro and Kaminari. But all the while Katsuki wasn't really paying attention. Her focus was more on the green-haired boy sitting across the cafeteria. Ever since they had come to Yua, Izuku completely avoided her at all costs. Unless he had no choice, a part of her did understand why she didn't exactly make his childhood the best. But the least he could do was to acknowledge her for once. However, he had completely slipped out of all possible contact with her. Most of her curiosity was around the fact that he was at Yua. As far as she knew, he was quirkless ever since they were kids. Did he lie about that? Or was he a late bloomer? There were so many things she wanted answers to. Alas, she couldn't get them from him. Lunch break was over, and they all headed back to class. Funny enough, she sort of ran into him, seeing as they sat next to each other in class. But the boy simply took a short glance and sat down facing forward. She growled again. He didn't say anything. PST, she tried calling to him to get his attention. Class is about to start. Bakugo, he said in an uncharacteristically dismissive tone. Katsuki recoiled in surprise, as she wasn't expecting his tone. But what he said was what hit her, rather how he addressed her. Did he just use my last name? Now that was weird. Ever since she could remember, Izuku called her Kacchan, and not Bakugo. She glanced over to him, still surprised, but then sighed and looked forward as Aizawa walked into the classroom. All right, now that you're back from luck break. School was over for the day, and the students were heading for their dorms to rest up. As usual, Izuku was with his group of friends and Katsuki with hers. She was oddly quiet through the walk to the dorms. Something wrong? Bakugo Kaminari asked, wagging his eyebrows at her beat. It Pikachu, she said, quickly waving off his advances. She didn't have time for that right now. Why she even entertained it? She didn't even know herself. I don't know about that. It's more like him just trying not to piss her off. Somehow, I've always had this talent for doing so. Katsuki overheard Izuku say to Shoto as they were walking ahead of them. He looked different now that they had entered high school. He had grown up quite a bit and wasn't scrawny anymore, understandably. So he turned slightly and green met red. But it wasn't for long as he turned away and didn't turn back anymore. Katsuki growled again in slight annoyance. It was like he was toying with her. Later that evening, as everyone was lazing around in the common area, Katsuki was outside wanting to get away from the noise. It wasn't that she didn't like being around her friend. Yes, friends this time. However, she wasn't in the right state of mind. A small sound caught her attention. It sounded like someone had just dropped something. It was Izuku. He was sitting on the grass, scribbling something in his notebook. Katsuki just watched silently, remembering what she did to one of his notebooks, and cringed at the memory. It wasn't something she was proud of. He wrote a few things down, talking to himself, then suddenly went completely silent and looked straight in her direction. Katsuki was surprised he had actually noticed her, as she was trying not to be seen. It's just me. I was passing by and heard some sounds back here. Just wanted to check, she explained, watching as his eyes narrowed slightly. Oh, okay then, was all he said as he continued what he was doing. Katsuki, however, didn't leave, rather walked over and sat down across him, looking straight at him. It didn't take long before the discomfort on his face began to show. What do you want, Bakugo? He asked, looking at her. She was taken aback at the eye contact, but mentally smiled. He finally grew a backbone. What's up with all this Bakugo stuff? It's fucking weird, she spoke up. Izuku held his stare for a few moments and spoke without having his eyes leave hers. We both know why. Katsuki's eyes flickered with regret, seeing how serious he looked at that moment. But she kept silent, knowing he wasn't done. After all I've been through elementary and middle school, you think I would want anything to do with all that? We're obviously not friends. It's as clear as day. I'm just trying not to be a burden on you, like you've said numerous times that I am, so if you don't mind, I'd like it if you left me alone, please. Good night, Bakugo. Katsuki was stunned. This was the longest string of words he had spoken towards her in months. Izuku gave her one last look before getting up. Wait, what is it? He asked, turning to her. I never mind, thought so, he said as he left her there to her thoughts. Now that she had heard it from the horse's mouth, she really was seeing it all now. I was terrible to him all this time. This was how he really felt years back. They were inseparable until it all turned gray when her quirk came around. Along with her newly found ego, she pushed her best friend down the pole to the very bottom, seeing him as nothing more than a Deku. I'm sorry, she said softly to no one in particular. Izuku was just behind the wall and heard what he said. He looked up at the sky and closed his eyes. He couldn't just let it slide like nothing happened. Maybe it was for the best that they should remain this way. Things can't just go back to how they were. Life doesn't work that way, he said, reaffirming himself and heading to the dorms. The class dynamic in one had changed ever so slightly in one person specifically. Katsuki had toned down her engagement in class discussions. Not that she was talkative to begin with, her explosive attitude was ever present. That was just her nature. But her friends could tell something was off. Whatever it was, it had to be related to Izuku in some way, as their interactions in class was tense to say the least. She seemed more quiet than usual around him, and he seemed indifferent towards her. Mina deciding she had enough dragged Izuku off to talk to him. So would you mind telling me what's going on with you and Bakugo? Izuku's eyes narrowed at the name. I would actually. It's personal. Mina was taken aback by his tone. Dude, is it really that deep? We're your friends. If we can't help you, who will? She asked. I'm sorry, but what happened is between me and Bakugo. If she tells you, fine, but you're not hearing anything from me. It's already bad enough that others are getting involved. I want to get through this on my own, and I'd appreciate it. You didn't butt in, Izuku said with a very serious voice. Unlike his usual demeanor, Mina sighed. Okay, fine, sorry for pushing your buttons, man. That's okay if y'all excuse me. I have to get something from the library, he said, slinging his bag over his shoulder and leaving. I've never seen Midoriya look so serious before. What could have happened, she asked herself. She shrugged and walked away, hoping they would resolve whatever their problem was. It was kind of funny in a way that dynamic between them really didn't change for the following weeks. But one particular day. Happy birthday, Bakugo. Katsuki groaned in embarrassment, but still smiled at her friend's gesture. She was happy that they celebrated her. Here, I got this for you, Mina said, shoving a present into her, and the rest did the same. Katsuki felt both happy and empty at the same time. In the corner of her eye, she made out the figure of Izuku, who was leaving the dorms and probably heading out to train or something. Sigh, he didn't say anything. The day felt off and away for her, and she didn't see Izuku throughout. He was out for basically the entire day. Eventually, she called it a day and headed up to her room. The rest of the class, most of them, were all downstairs. But she needed time to herself. As she stepped into her room and shut the door behind her, she raised an eyebrow at the sight before her. On her balcony was a decently sized box wrapped with green paper. Curiously, she went to grab it, thinking it was probably some prank. But she saw a small piece of paper attached to it. It wasn't long, but she recognized the handwriting. Happy birthday. Katsuki was stunned and opened it slowly. Her eyes widened, as it was unbeknownst to many exactly what she wanted as a present. He knew, she said to herself with a small smile. Izuku still was nowhere to be found. All through the day and late into the evening, he was in the middle of his training when he heard some sounds coming from the corner. Katsuki came round the corner with a neutral expression on her face. His eyes immediately narrowed, but not out of hostility. Anything I can help you with, he asked in a neutral tone. You remembered. Despite everything she said, looking at him, Izuku looked down and sighed. Please, I really need to get stronger. If you don't mind, I'll just ask, do you hate me? If yes, then say so and I'll walk away. I'll stay away from you, and you won't have to deal with me anymore, Katsuki said. After a small round of silence between them, Izuku couldn't say anything, not even knowing how to go about it. But one thing was clear, he didn't hate her. I don't hate you. That's a relief, Katsuki cut in as she slowly dropped to her knees. At first, Izuku thought nothing of it, until he figured out that she was crying. He was really nervous, never having to deal with crying females before all this time. I was sure you hated me. I know what I did, and am not proud of it. I let my quirk control me and pushed you away. I never stood up for you, and most times I even joined in what those kids were doing to you in middle school. You don't have to like me anymore. I just want to say I'm sorry for everything I've done. Izuku stood there frozen still in shock. Did Katsuki just apologize to him? Maybe he was dreaming, right? Katsuki felt something warm around her shoulders and looked up to see that Izuku wasn't wearing his sweater anymore. It had started drizzling. Please get up, y'all get a cold. You stay out like this, he said with slight emotion in his voice. Katsuki nodded and got up. Then he spoke up again. To be honest, I let things go a while ago. I just thought you didn't want me around you. You're my first friend, and yeah, things got rocky. But I held hope that one day you'd be back to normal. Guess that's today, he said with a small smile. Katsuki's eyes watered again as he smiled at her. It had been so long since he did that. Welcome back, Kachan. She rushed and hugged him tightly and cried again. She never cried, it wasn't in her nature. But here she was sobbing like a kid who was lost and had just found their mother. Izuku smiled and gently rubbed her back. I'm sorry, Izuku, she sniffed out. It's fine, I'm just glad to have my friend back. The class dynamic had changed again. After that day, Katsuki's usually foul mood was gone. While she wasn't a complete opposite, she still was overall safer to be around. She had finally told her friends about her past with Izuku, and they were happy that she had taken such a step. Probably the most embarrassing part was the Kachan part. But she really didn't mind, though she may have had to blow up Kaminari a few times. Only Izuku could use that name. Mina, her friend, often teased her about it, which would make the usually aggressive blonde take a more shy approach to stopping her. It was weird that of all people, It was Izuku that could make Katsuki Bakugo, their resident firecracker turned to Moshizawa, had also taken notice of the new development, and was in a way happy about it. If they now had a way to keep Bakugo from butting heads with people, he was all for it. And plus, he was winning his bet with present Mike. "Come here, you blonde bastard, I'll kill you," Katsuki roared as she launched after Momo from Class B, who had provoked her. "Come and get it, bitch," he screamed back, taking his fighting stance. The students immediately got in between them to break up the fights, Kendo dragging Momo and knocking him out, and Izuku, who was struggling with Katsuki, to make her drop the matter. Eventually he gave up and just dragged her away to a more secluded area. "Calm down. You know how Momo is," he said with a sigh. "Dude, he's so fucking annoying. This is the third time he's crossing today," she said with a growl. Izuku, despite the situation, chuckled to himself, making his friend raise an eyebrow in confusion. "What's so funny?" "I was just thinking you and Momo." The rest of the sentence hung in the air between them, and she glared at him. "No way in hell," she said with a fake gag. "Then you should probably stop getting into those bickers with him. People are quick to start shipping, especially the fandom." "Fandom, never mind that," Izuku said, waving it off. "Still, you shouldn't let him get under your skin so often. If you do that, I'm sure Kendo will do her part keeping him in check." "Sound good?" "I guess so," she responded with a huff. "Let's head back to class," Izuku said, as he started walking away. Katsuki looked at his retreating figure, and then touched her stomach. She didn't show it, but she was surprised that he picked her up and dragged her away. She didn't know he could be well like that. "Come on, just admit it. You like him, don't you?" Mina asked with a mischievous smirk. "Cut it out. I don't want to talk about it," Katsuki said, waving her friend off. "I'm pretty sure everyone knows you turn to mush. When he's around, you get annoyed seeing him with other girls. And are you forgetting the Kachin part? It's pretty obvious," Mina said with a deadpan expression. "Ugh, this is such a pain. Just tell him. Or at least give him signs. Midoriya is a pretty smart guy. He'll figure it out," Mina said, putting her hand on her friend's shoulder. "Fine. I'll try. Yay, can't wait to see you all lovey-dove." "I think that's enough, Mina," Katsuki said, shoving a meatball into her mouth. Lucky for them, it was a Friday, so they were free for the weekend. Katsuki had never been so nervous around Izuku before, ever since they were kids. It was never this way. Sure, she thought he was pretty cute, but she never really dwelled on the possibility that she'd end up liking him that way. As usual, Izuku wasn't in the common area, and he wasn't outside either. She made her way up to the boys' area, of course, having to deal with Minta and Kaminara's antics. Finally, she stopped at his door and softly knocked. "Come in." She pushed the door and stepped in, surprising him. He thought it was Shoto. "Hey, Kachin, can I help you with something?" "Well, actually, Izuku, I wanted to talk to you about something." Izuku sat on the floor, and she sat next to him. They were both silent for a few seconds. "So what did you want to talk about?" he asked. "About us." Izuku listened with interest. Was this the final part of this fanf? "I'm listening." He said, "Well, I was wondering, do you like someone?" "I do, actually." Katsuki's mind began racing with thoughts, and for the most part, she feared that he liked someone else. "Maybe Uraraka, or even Tsuyu." "Oh," she said in a deflated voice. "I actually have liked her for a long time, but circumstances sort of buried that feeling for a while. I'll be honest with you, Kachin. I don't think we can be friends anymore," he said suddenly. She turned to him in shock. "What do you mean by that?" Was he finally taking his revenge for what she did? Did he hate her all this time? Izuku smiled, seeing her confusion, which didn't help her train of thought. "Let me explain. I don't think we can remain friends because I have feelings for you. I have for a long time, ever since we were kids. I know you still feel bad, but don't. It's all in the past. I wanted to get stronger, so that you'd finally notice me. I didn't think I was good enough to come back into your life. I guess things turned out fine. But when you apologized to me, I was sort of bummed out. Truth is, I was always going to tell you how I felt, even if it would break our friendship. That's what I meant. I like you." Kachin. Katsuki sat there stunned, her red eyes staring into his determined green ones. Izuku eventually looked down and chuckled to himself. "So that's that. I told you. I understand if you don't feel the same way." Katsuki placed her hand over his, regaining his attention, his eyebrows furrowed in confusion. But then he got the message. He smiled at her and held her hand tighter. "I feel the same way, Izuku. I probably always have, but I never paid mind to it. When I lost you, I felt weird, and I didn't like that feeling. That was when I came to the conclusion that I didn't want you to hate me, and I knew why I like you too." They both looked down shyly, their fingers still interlocked. Katsuki leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. "This wasn't how I thought it'd go down, honestly," he said, breaking the silence. "Me too. But it worked out, so I'm happy it did go this way." Katsuki replied, "So are we." "I know, yup, you're all mine now," she said with a small smile. The news broke out to the class, And needless to say, they were shocked, at least to those that weren't aware of the situation beforehand. Finally, you guys got together, Kirishima said, with an exhausted sigh. Yeah, it was so frustrating egging you on, and watching you do nothing, his girlfriend Mina added. TCH, whatever, Katsuki said, with a small blush of embarrassment. Both her friends laughed at this. On the other side, Izuku's friends were having the same reaction. Shoto was happy for his friend being aware of the situation. Tsuyuida and Uraraka were all surprised at the turn of events. How I'd be lying if I said I knew things just kind of fell in place. Thanks to the author, Izuku said, looking up. Author? Never mind that, I was just thinking out loud. Aizawa, who was watching from the teacher's faculty office, turned to present Mike with a grin. Pay up, damn teenager hormones, the pro grumbled, as he had lost their bet. Didn't take you for matchmaker, Aizawa Midnight said with a chuckle. Well, it's one of my 108 loner skills. I could tell right away, the man said, closing his eyes and kicking back in his chair. Winning a bet was pretty nice. Maybe he'd reward himself with some max coffee. Hey, has anyone seen Kachin? Izuku asked, coming down from his room. Your girlfriend went to the nurse's office. She called in sick or something, Kaminari said. Oh, I'll go check, thanks. Yeah, sure, maybe you can get me a girlfriend, the yellow-haired boy yelled as Izuku ran out the dorms. Kaminari was quite the character. Too bad this isn't his story, Izuku said to himself. As he was walking, it didn't take him long to get there. And he saw her coming out. Hey, Izuku, Achu. You don't look so good. Cold, she nodded and walked towards him. Izuku then had an idea and a no. It's embarrassing, she protested. Okay, then he said, and turned to leave. But she grabbed his jacket sleeve. You're such a jerk. Why no, you didn't even try to convince me despite her previous protest. She did let him carry her, and it felt nice. Remember when I used to give you piggyback rides? He asked. Yeah, just like you are right now, though things have Achu changed, Katsuki said. With a sniffle. Changed sounded about right, as his back felt the biggest ones of all. He wasn't a perv, but he was a guy. Yup, changed indeed. Katsuki immediately caught on to what he meant and growled at him. You perv, I'll explode you when I'm all better. Izuku just laughed off the threat, and she smiled softly. And what about now? What's stopping you from doing so? He asked with a smirk. Just you wait, I'll make you explode. She said. That's not the best choice of words, Kachin, Izuku said, and laughed at how she shrunk, realizing the other meaning of what she said. You're such a jerk, she said in a low voice. I know. Okay, how did this happen? Aizawa asked, looking at his entire class on the floor groaning in pain. All except 3 students, Shoto Todoroki and Katsuki Bakugo, who didn't participate in the just concluded beatdown. And then most surprisingly, Izuku Midoriya, the supposed glass cannon of class. When Aizawa was pretty stunned, to say the least, that the boy held his own against US top student Mirio Tagada with his quirk. He should be out for the count by now, but again Izuku Midoriya was full of surprises, and he sure as hell surprised him today. It seemed he had a quirk awakening, something that made him to be able to predict where his senior colleague would pop out after he phased into the ground. Mirio smirked and dove back into the ground again. Aizawa watched with interest, and so did Shoto. He was witnessing something that made him both excited and jealous. Izuku was evolving faster than anyone in the class, and he didn't want to fall behind. The boy's green eyes stayed in one spot before suddenly darting towards a certain direction, exactly where Mirio flew out to attack him. The blonde faked an attack, going for Izuku's eyes, which would have worked, but Izuku didn't fall for it and ended up blocking yet another punch from Mirio. Okay, I think that's enough, dude. You're insane for a first-year, Mirio said, putting his clothes back on. Thanks. Izuku replied, totally confused by what happened. At first he was getting hit from all sides, but then suddenly he could tell where Mirio would come out from next. Well, not exactly tell, but more like he could sense it. Aizawa closed his eyes and hid his smirk under his capture tape. This kid never ceased to amaze him. And if you haven't guessed its danger sense, I decided that it should be the first quirk he unlocks. Also, Izuku is pretty decently strong in this story, at least strong enough to access the other quirks in one. For all, this variant of danger sense is basically spider sense, which is borderline precognition. Pretty op, I know. But it's not a canon story, so I can play with it as much as I want. Back to the story. I would definitely like to spar with you again, Midoriya, the tall blonde said to his junior with a thumbs up. Yeah, I'd like that too, senpai, Izuku said shyly. Mirio did explain what he was initially trying to, which was the importance of the work studies, and how it would benefit them all from participating in it. Hearing his words, and having their asses handed to them, Mirio was more than enough to motivate them. I didn't know your quirk could do that, Midoriya. What's it like? How does it work? Can you see the future or something? Izuku shrunk at the sudden attention from another of his seniors, the big three's own Nejire Hado. She just kept asking questions, and poking him, which he wasn't a huge fan of. "Hado, leave him alone, can't you see he's uncomfortable?" Tamaki, their other classmate, said with a sympathetic look at his green-haired junior being one to fall victim to Nejire's constant stream of questions regularly. He knew the feeling all too well. There was kindred spirit he felt in Izuku, and he could tell that they had similar personalities. "HMPH, you're no fun, Amajiki. I was just curious," is all Nejire said. With a small pout, Izuku sighed in relief that she backed away, having someone like Nejire Hado all over him. Yeah. He wasn't so sure how to react to that. If he was being honest, he had no idea what just happened. He'd probably have to talk to All Might about this later on. "Good job, Midoriya. You managed to hang in there with Mirio. That's a feat on its own," Aizawa said, satisfied with his performance. They were dismissed for the day, and on his way out he was approached by Mirio. "Yo, Midoriya, we were gonna get something to eat. Would you like to come with?" Izuku turned around and looked to see if there was anyone else named Midoriya. "There wasn't. You and me," he stuttered out, surprised. "Yeah, of course, it's you," Mirio said with a laugh. "Well, if you don't mind, I'd like to," he said in a small voice. "That's great. I have some questions I've been dying to ask you." Nejire cut in before Mirio could speak. Izuku's sweat dropped. Tamaki pat him on the shoulder. As the other two began to walk away, "Buckle up, you're in for quite a hassle," he said in a low voice. Walking with them, Izuku could already see the dynamic between them. Mirio and Nejire were the bright and sunny personalities, and then Tamaki was the quiet, and you would say sometimes gloomy one. In short, he did most of the listening, which he didn't mind doing. Tamaki was surprisingly a nice guy, as Izuku found out. Maybe it was because they were both naturally quiet by nature that they both were comfortable around each other. They got to the cafeteria and all got some snacks. Izuku settled for some Oreos and milk, which would have been weird for them if Tamaki hadn't gotten the exact same thing. With each passing second, he could see more of the mini-him in the first year, and someone he could possibly be friends with. "So Midoriya, as I was asking earlier before I was interrupted, how does your quirk work exactly? I thought it was a power type, but you didn't really use it that way." Nejire began. I'd be lying if I said I knew. It just happened on the spot. I was getting hit by Mirio-senpai. Then suddenly I wasn't. I think it's a quirk evolution or something, because I could sense where Mirio would pop out from, and also what attacks were bluffs. I should probably make a few notes on that, though I may be completely wrong, but it reminds me of spider sense, but without the tingles, or at least not tingles, but a jolt. Sorry, I was rambling again," Izuku said, realizing he had been droning on for a while. Now they both smiled at him, reassuring him that it was fine. "Everyone's got something they do that seems weird." "No biggie," Mirio said with a shrug. Izuku was actually taken aback by how nice they were. He had such an experience before, and it didn't end well for him. He never truly moved on from it, which was why he had a hard time trusting people. He did quiet down as time passed, but they just chalked it up to him being shy. I mean, he basically just met them. Tamaki, however, saw a different story unfolding. Izuku's eyes, they hid a scared, even mistrustful gaze at them. He understood that feeling perfectly. It had to have stemmed from years of bad treatment or worse. "Well, Midoriya, well, see you another time. It was really nice to meet you," Mirio said, shaking the boy's hand. Yeah, next time I'll have even more questions to ask," Nejire said excitedly. As they walked away, Tamaki spoke up. "I know how you feel. I've been there too. But I assure you that Mirio and Hado are good people. I don't know what happened to you, but there aren't all bad people in the world. Just remember that." Izuku looked at the retreating figure of his senior with a surprised look. Was Tamaki also? No way. He has a quirk. A few weeks had passed since that first encounter, and Izuku found out that, true to Tamaki's words, he had nothing to worry about regarding his new friends. His blue-haired senpai was surprisingly helpful to him in their own ways. They were all a breath of fresh air. Mirio was bright and funny. Nejire was as well, but also was very interested in quirks, and was a curious person. Tamaki was the most relatable to him. However, Izuku wasn't sure he'd ever have the confidence level of Mirio. In a way, he kind of saw why Sir Nitai wanted him to get one for all. He was a perfect fit for the quirk. He had a strong enough body, and his personality and confidence was something to admire. Just like All Might, things took a drastic turn, as with a raid on the Shy Hisekai group, and the uncovering of a quirk-destroying bullet. Mirio ended up losing his quirk protecting a little girl. It was devastating news, but the blonde still kept his spirits up. He had gone through a lot and smiled. Thought it again. Just like All Might, he really was perfect for one for all. Time ran rather quickly, and they were soon staring down another school festival. Students eagerly prepared for it, doing whatever to show off on the main day. Class 1 were not left out of the preparations either, and were busy discussing in their dorms when Tamaki walked in. "Excuse me, I'm here for Midoriya Tamakai-senpai." That surprising, Tsuyu said, confused. As to why he would be looking for their green-haired classmate, Izuku came down the stairs, made his way to the door, where Tamaki was. "Where are you guys heading to?" Mina asked. "Well, the store. I was sent to get some things for Eri, and I don't want to go alone, so I asked if Midoriya could tag along," Tamaki explained. "And it's scary talking to the cashier alone." "Well, I'll see you guys later," Izuku said with a wave as they left, leaving his classmates confused. "Didn't know he was buddy-buddy with Tamaki-senpai," Kirishima said, surprised. Back with the other two, they walked towards the outside of the school in relative silence. But neither really minded it. "So how's Eri doing?" Izuku asked. "She's shaken up, understandably so, but overall she's fine." "That's a relief. She must have gone through hell with overhaul," Izuku said, a bit on anger entering his voice. "What kind of monster would do that to a little kid? I can't even imagine how it must have been for her. I'm just glad she's safe now, and that freak's behind bars like he deserves to be," Tamaki replied. They got to the store and got the supplies, then headed back to school before curfew. Even though it was an errand, Aizawa still liked punctuality, and they weren't keen on testing the man. "I'll be heading to the dorms now. I want to beat curfew. Say hi to Mirio-senpai for me," Izuku said with a small wave. "Wait, huh?" Tamaki pulled out his phone and gave it to Izuku. "I would like to have your contact info to keep in touch." "Okay." Izuku put in his number and headed back to his dorms. "Amajiki-senpai is really nice." Tamaki watched the boy walk into the distance with a neutral look on his face, another step closer to uncovering the mystery that was Izuku Midoriya. He didn't know why he was curious, but he was. But one thing was clear: Izuku was hiding something. And being someone in that situation before, he hoped it wasn't what he was thinking. Nejire was many things: happy, funny, and most times brutally honest, said what was on her mind. But right now she was at a mental roadblock. She had been getting this funny feeling ever since she had seen a certain Izuku Midoriya. Something about the boy just appealed to her. Maybe it was because he held some semblance of innocence that most boys his age didn't have, or his nervous demeanor that vanished when he was talking about something he was really passionate about, or the way his mind worked. Izuku for sure saw the world differently, which made him act differently, and while others thought it was weird, she thought it was cute. The problem was that Midoriya never reacted comfortably when she was around him, be it a question or just a friendly wave. He would almost immediately go into his shell, and his stuttering would come back full force. He never did any of that with Mirio or Tamaki. Did he not like her? That would be a big problem. Sure, she could be a bit over the top when it came to asking questions or seem airheaded at times. But was that enough? Or maybe she was just overthinking this. Maybe Izuku didn't hate her. Maybe he was just nervous because she was a girl. That would make the most sense. Nejire, though, had made up her mind she was a brutally honest person, and so she would not lie to herself or to anyone. Izuku Midoriya was her target, and she would win him over. Didn't sound conventional, but that was just who she was. She wouldn't sit down and wait for him to come around and very possibly fall for someone else. Ochako came to mind. For that, she got off her bed and headed to her friend's room. But overhead, two voices coming from Tamaki's room. It sounded like Izuku, so she leaned in against the door with her ear to hear what they could possibly be talking about on the inside. "So would you care to tell me how you really feel about this?" Izuku looked down to collect his words. "Honestly, I'm scared," he said with a small voice. Nejire scrunched her eyebrows in confusion, scared of what exactly. She pushed the thoughts away as he continued. "Hado-senpai is a good person, but due to my past experiences, I can't really be comfortable around females. Truth is, I was a very late bloomer with my quirk, as my body couldn't handle the power, and because of that, I was labeled quirkless. My life became hell from that point. I lost my friends, everyone called me a freak, and the kids at school made fun of me and bullied me. However, there was one girl who suddenly turned over a new leaf. Her name was Chiyo, and I, not having any friends and being so desperate for one, fell for it. Long story short, it was all a huge prank, which ended up with her sneaking her underwear into my school bag. You could imagine the shame I felt and the disgust that I felt from others. I was not only labeled as quirkless, but a pervert as well. My treatment got worse after that day, and she would always mock me about it, that I was gullible enough to think anyone would ever like me. And I don't blame her now looking back at it. I don't want to tell my entire life story, but I think you get the general idea. It was rough, so I can't help but feel the same when someone like Hado-senpai is all friendly with me." Tamaki listened with a look of shock. Sure, he was expecting something around those lines, but this was insane. "I'm sorry to hear that," he said slowly. "It's fine, it's all behind me now. I have a quirk now and am working to be the #1 hero. If I at least keep myself busy, I won't fall for anyone else," Izuku said, then sighed. "Listen, as I told you before, I can understand what you're going through, at least for the most part, because I was bullied too. But people aren't all that bad. Just because you met the bad ones doesn't mean that the good ones don't exist. I think I get it, but still. Don't sweat it. Hato can be overbearing, yes. But she's a good person, and her heart's in the right place. Truth is, she wasn't always like this at first. She was pretty scary and antisocial. But she mellowed out as time passed, so you have nothing to worry about. I give you my word. As her friend Izuku felt reassured by the seriousness in Tamaki's voice. In truth, he was grateful to his senior. When he first met him, he never imagined that he'd be opening up to him. Nejire, who had been listening, had her eyes wide in shock. Did he really got through all that as a kid? That's rough. Another voice said from behind her, making her scream and stumble into the room. Mirio had been listening alongside her and walked in with a somewhat serious look on his face. Izuku and Tamaki looked at the girl who had screamed and sprawled into the room with raised eyebrows. So you were eavesdropping? That's not okay, Tamaki said with a small frown. No. It's fine, actually. It's easier for me if they know about it. Izuku said, I had no idea you went through so much. I'm really sorry to hear that. Rest assured that I would never betray you. Midoriya, Mirio said with a smile. Yeah, me too. And also, if I get annoying, please tell me. I don't want to be a bother to you, okay? Nejire added. I'll do that, Izuku said with a small laugh. Izuku was relieved that he got all that off his chest, and it showed in his behavior. While he wasn't a complete 180, you could see that he obviously looked more energetic and wasn't spacing out as much as he used to. His interactions with his friends also improved, as he had now come to truly cherish them. You seem happier these days. Hope we aren't all in trouble, Shoto said, sitting across him during lunch break. Izuku chuckled at his friend's attempt at a joke. It was actually funny this time. Big improvement. No reason, I just feel like some weight's been lifted off me, he said with a smile. That weight must have been something. Then you're like beaming today, Uraraka added as she sat next to the green-haired boy. Their little group talked idly, mostly about the upcoming final year exams. Izuku spotted a mop of periwinkle blue hair in the corner of his eyes, but didn't turn to look. He knew it was Nejire, but it didn't seem she saw him. He was wrong. Nejire did see him, and Uraraka next to him. She tilted her head, a bit a sign of slight displeasure after that day and Izuku's confession. She said she would hold back on pestering him, but it didn't mean she would stop talking to him. She had a mission after all. You guys can go ahead of me. I'll see you in class, she said to her friends, who only gave confused looks and shrugged. Hey, Izuku, the boy and his friends all turned to her with looks of confusion. Hato-senpai, it's nice to see you again, Uraraka greeted. Yo, Ochako, how have you been? And Ida, right. I remember that's your name. And Todoroki, it's nice to see you guys again, she said in one breath. Hato-senpai, please remember to breathe, Izuku pointed out. So what brings you here? Shoto asked. Well, if you guys don't mind, I'll be borrowing Izuku for lunch break, she said, clasping her hands together over her head. So I didn't hear things, was what they all thought. Nejire did use Izuku's first name. Sure, it's no problem. Great. Let's go, Izuku, she said, dragging the boy away. They left the cafeteria, and Nejire led him to a part of the school that he didn't know about. And then they climbed some stairs and onto a small rooftop area. Izuku looked around, noting that they were alone. Not the best time for him. He didn't think he could handle being alone with Nejire. His heart and his head wouldn't be able to keep him. So what are we doing here? He asked. Nejire turned to face him, and unlike her previous demeanor, she was more serious, still smiling, though she was a brutally honest person and wouldn't lie to herself or to anyone. Izuku, I like you. Izuku scrunched up his eyebrows in confusion, and then looked behind him, as if there was someone else. She giggled at his reaction, but it was understandable. This was out of the blue. You mean me? He asked, confused. Nejire nodded. Yes, I like you. This isn't a prank, or you're mistaking me for someone else. It's me, Midoriya Ino, Izuku said, still with that confused look. I know it's you. And no, it's not a prank. I'm serious about this, Nejire said. Izuku genuinely didn't know how to process this. His mind was racing from one end of the world to the other, her words causing turmoil in him. Nejire walked closer to him till they were just a foot apart, and she took his hand. Listen, not asking you for a response. I just wanted to tell you how I felt. Not someone who holds on to things much, and I just spill out whatever is on my mind. It's not playing with you or toying with your emotions. I know, but you can do so much better than me. There are better-looking guys who would kill to date you. So it's not just making any sense why you'd choose to like me of all people, Izuku said with a low voice. Well, that's how romance is. It doesn't make sense. Things just happen spontaneously. And I think that's what makes it special. And to what you said, I don't agree. I don't have an eye for anyone else but you, Nejire replied, booping him on the nose. Izuku flushed red at the contact and backed away, slightly feeling the wall pressing against his back. Nejire smiled. and moved closer to him, the red hue growing until even his ears were red. You know 𝗧𝗂𝗵𝗲 very stubborn just like you. So you know I won't give up till I've won you over. Right, alright, I'll keep that in mind, he said, looking at Anywhere. But her eyes Nejire backed away and regained her previous demeanor. That's great, I'm glad. We could come to an agreement on this. Hada-senpai, your demeanor just did a 180. Izuku said nervously, seriously, yes. Sorry, that part of me just slips out every now and then, she said with a small laugh. Tamaki was right, she could be scary. His thoughts were interrupted by a hand grabbing his. It was Nejire's. What are you doing? He asked, holding hands. I was serious about what I said. And I'll make sure you give me an answer, she said with a grin. Okay, then senpai. Another thing, Izuku, what is it? He replied, wondering what the deal was now. Use my first name seriously. Life at UF for Izuku was as usual except for one thing. True to her words, Nejire made it clear that he was her target. They did everything a couple would do, from hand holding to eating lunch together to hanging out together on dates, all this in secret of course. No one really suspected anything was going on between them, well, except for Tamaki, who was pretty sure he knew what was going on. He wasn't going to say anything though. Izuku was now one of his best friends. All that underlying romance was blown out the door when the war started. Heroes fought tirelessly against the villains, and that led to the destruction of cities and deaths of many innocent civilians. Society was turned upside down with the many prison breakouts that roamed the open streets. In the course of the war, even the students were affected, some injured more than others, and Izuku in particular went into a short coma. Needless to say, his friends were all worried about him. He was the one who fought off Shigaraki and saved a lot of lives in the process, but put his at risk in the process. However, once again, he surprised them all by not only waking up, but then going off after Shigaraki and all for one, leaving Yua behind. It was both worrying and annoying. Why would he just go off on his own? Izuku, in his thinking, didn't want anyone to get hurt because of him. His classmates had other ideas, going off after him to bring him back to Yua and his senses, which they managed to do. He apologized and received a scolding from Mirio and Tamaki, who were worried for their friend Nejire. Well, she wasn't happy to say the least. Izuku gulped as he reached her door and looked back to his two friends, who gave him not so reassuring smiles and motioned for him to knock. He softly knocked on the door, which opened almost immediately. Nejire had an unreadable expression on her face. Izuku gulped again. Come inside, she said, stepping aside and letting him enter, then slammed the door shut. Good luck, man. Y'all need it, Mirio said with a shudder. Nejire sat down on the floor, and Izuku did same, both leaning against her bed. No one said anything for some minutes. I'm sorry, he said, looking down. Nejire turned to face him. For what exactly? Throwing yourself into a fight that could have killed you. Not telling me you woke up from a coma leaving Yua. What exactly are you sorry for, Izuku? She asked, looking at him seriously. For not trusting you at the end of the day. That's what all this is about. What I did was reckless, yes. But at the time, it was the only way to save everyone there. I'm sorry for going off on my own. I just thought that the people you care about would get hurt. Nejire finished. It's okay to be selfish, Izuku. You don't have to save everyone all the time. That's something I came to see as well. We're all heroes, so we can help you. We're only human at the end of the day. There's only so much one person can do alone. Please understand that there are people who care about you. I'm sorry. He apologized again, looking sad. That's okay, I'm just glad you're safe. Izuku sighed in relief. He really didn't mean to worry everyone like that. At the time, he thought it was for the best. But now he realized that he couldn't do it alone. One for all or not, he wasn't alone in this fight. They both didn't say anything after that, just enjoying the silence that was set between them. It was one of the few times recently that they had a small period of peace and quiet. It didn't last long, though, as many things unraveled as they approached the final fight against All for One. Aoyama's status as a mole for the villains revealed the truth about One for All got out to the world, and probably the worst of all, the reveal of Izuku Midoriya's own father, All for One himself. It was ironic that the man he was destined to defeat turned out to be his own father, and he was devastated to hear that Izuku, despite that, pushed through for the sake of others and for his own sake to defeat All for One and Shigaraki. The war that lasted weeks finally came to an end with the heroes victorious, and society celebrated. Izuku Midoriya, however, was in mental turmoil. The reveal of his father's true identity shook him to no end, and the fact that he suppressed the memories in his mother disgusted him. Now it came full circle. He wanted nothing to do with All for One or Hisashi Midoriya. Think about it, Hisashi Midoriya never even existed. He was just a fake memory planted into them. Life began to go back to normal in Japan, and with quirks, rebuilding was not a problem. Schools soon reopened and Class 1 officially moved up to their second year. which meant that the present third years had graduated. It was a bittersweet moment for Izuku. While he was happy for them, had also missed them. They had come to be some of his most treasured friends. Take care of yourself, Midoriya. We won't be around to watch you anymore, Mirio said, putting his hand over the boy's shoulder. Yeah, try not to get into too much trouble, Tamaki added. I will, and good luck to you guys. You are officially pros now. I might soon start asking for autographs, Izuku said with a small laugh. Nejire was surprisingly quiet through this, and Tamaki, sensing it, dragged Mirio away, leaving the two to themselves. Neither said anything for a while, until Izuku spoke. Nejire seemed down. Nejire him. Remember what you told me some time back? He asked about that. Well, you'd get your answer from me, no matter what. Izuku continued. Yeah, I do. Izuku cleared his throat and looked at her. Well, I have my answer now and am sure of it. I probably always was, but my past experiences shrouded that conviction. I love you, Nejire. That's my answer. Despite the blush he had on his face, he still didn't look away, his eyes holding the same conviction his words portrayed. Nejire looked down with a small smile. You really are cruel, Izuku, huh? Why do you say that? You literally told me this on the day I'm graduating. That's like the ultimate jerk move, dude, she said, lightly punching him on the shoulder. Sorry about that, he apologized with a small laugh. Still, I'm glad you feel the same way, she said with a small blush. She looked so adorable right now that Izuku could just die. Still, there was one thing he wanted to ask of her. One last favor. I'd like to ask you one more thing, he said. What is it, Izuku? If it's not too much for you, wait for me. I know how you feel about waiting, but right now I'm still a student and you're now a pro hero. It will only do harm if I asked you out now, so when I graduate I'll do it properly. I'll ask you to be my girlfriend. If y'all be there when I'm ready. Nejire smiled and hugged him tightly and whispered, when you graduate I'll be here. But don't keep me waiting. 2 years is enough, Izuku chuckled. But he was happy. Nejire pulled away from the hug and leaned in, kissing him. Izuku was surprised, but melted into it. They both were whisked away into their own little world, till they heard a loud whistle, both with blushes on their faces. They turned to see Mirio there, grinning like an idiot, and Tamaki with a defeated look on his face. Sorry, Izuku, I tried my best to stop him. Bye, Izuku, Nejire said, hugging him one last time before leaving with her two friends. He just stood there for a while, completely stupefied, but content. Slowly, he turned back to Yua. Their own journey had ended. Now it was his turn. Oh, I am here to wake you up. I am to wake you up. I am her to wa enough already, an annoyed voice yelled, smashing the poor alarm. 9 o'clock. Who did nothing wrong. Izuku sat up with a small groan. Waking up to All Might's voice when he was a kid was exciting, but now it was just annoying. He stretched a bit and popped his joints, groaning in satisfaction. He looked at the time and at first freaked out that he was late for his morning patrols, but then remembered it was a Sunday and it was already late in the afternoon. He was actually surprised he slept in for that long. Maybe the fatigue caught up to him. Oh yeah, I'm off duty today, he said, scratching the back of his head. There was a loud sound coming from downstairs that he picked up and chuckled. Angry footsteps were heard all the way up the stairs, and then stopped in front of his door. The door opened, revealing a miffed-looking Nejire, whose hair had been cut shorter than it was when she was a student. But most notably, she was doused in thick green sludge, and well, she wasn't too happy about that. Izuku wanted to laugh, but the look on her face advised him to keep his amusement to himself. So, how'd your day go? He asked, stifling a laugh. I'd rather not talk about it, Nejire said with a huff, and headed straight for a long luong soak. As soon as she was gone, Izuku burst into laughter. She looked like she was just shat out of a sewer. I can hear you. Nejire got out almost an hour later after she went in. Izuku had already made her something to eat, at least to get her mind off whatever happened. She seemed happier after the shower, understandably. So who would be happy covered in sludge? Right now both were in the living room, with Nejire sitting in the space between Izuku's knees, leaning in against him. She put her spoon on his lips, giggling as he twisted his face away from it. I don't like strawberry. It's far too sweet for me. He said he didn't hate strawberry ice cream, but it wasn't his favorite. He preferred mint or chocolate mint, which was what he was eating himself. Then I'll have some of yours. Then she said, taking out his own bowl and eating it, making a weird face. The flavor of chocolate and mint. I'm not a fan, she said, swirling the ice cream in her mouth. Izuku looked away with a small blush, as her tongue motion were pretty provocative. She noticed this and smirked at him, turning over and pushing him down Izuku's side as she sat on his lap, and looked down at him. What were you thinking about, Izu? It's nothing serious. I just had a thought, he said, waving her off. Though his anatomy betrayed him at this point, Nejire Feeling this, leaned down and kissed him. "We both know that's a lie," she whispered. "It's a natural reaction." "I'd be more concerned if it didn't get hard," he said with a sigh. "Oh, I agree. That would be bad for the both of us." Izuku flipped them over, putting him on top. Nejire smiled at him, not so innocently. "There you are." Izuku did have a side to him that was pretty dominant, which she seemed to like a lot, especially when he got like this. "I'm going to bed," he said, suddenly getting off her and heading upstairs. For some moments, she laid there processing everything. Then it hit her. He did not just leave her here when she was in the mood. Izuku Nejire Hano would get what she wanted no matter what. She did sigh. Life as a pro hero wasn't as exciting as Izuku thought it'd be most of the time. He just had to catch the occasional purse snatcher, which wasn't even challenging in the slightest. One outreached arm was all it took. And they'd be caught. Truth be told, he was guilty of actually giving the criminals a head start to make it more fun for himself. He was in his 3rd year now at UA, and was now in front of Maruko's hero agency. It wasn't somewhere he was expecting himself to land in, but all the same he quite enjoyed it here, mostly because Maruko didn't take sidekicks. It was always a puzzle as to why she agreed to take him as a student, seeing as the first time they met, well, it wasn't so good for him. Basically, she hated him on the basis that he was a spineless pansy. To this day, that ticked him off when he remembered it. He didn't look like it. But Izuku was actually one to keep grudges. This time was different. He wasn't the same boy he was 2 years ago, and he would make sure she knew it. Izuku took a short breath and pushed the doors open. Walking into the building, there was a bunch of people working in desks, and some other students from other schools that he recognized. Why was Maruko suddenly taking students? Said Hiro came into the reception, gaining their attention. She didn't look happy. That was pretty obvious. "Okay, listen, you all are here for a chance to work at my agency. But let's be real and agree that I work best alone, so with that being said, y'all all have to prove yourself to me in some way. I ain't taking no liabilities under my wing. Got it?" "Yes, Mom." She smirked a bit at the response. Maybe having people to push around wasn't so bad after all. And so her tests began, which was basically her just beating the crap out of the poor students who didn't stand a chance. Only a few made it out, some more injured than others. Izuku winced as he could feel their pain just from looking at them. Finally, it was his turn. And while he wasn't cocky, he knew for sure that he would not get kicked around by the pro hero. Maruko tilted her head when he entered as if she was trying to remember him. Then it hit her, and a sadistic smirk grew across her face. "Oh, this ass kicking's gonna be good." Izuku calmly took his stance and didn't say anything, rather waiting for her to make the first move. Danger sense was fully active, and he gauged 1 for all to about 30, which he knew wasn't enough to beat her. But with Fajin fast enough to keep up with her, Maruko, without warning, flew at him with a high kick, which he caught, and then used her momentum to swing her away, then used Black Whip to drag her back, and threw a solid kick to her midsection. Maruko stopped and held her stomach, feeling the pain. Then she looked back at him and grinned. "It seems you've grown now. I don't have to coddle you." Izuku mentally slapped himself. Riling her up was probably the worst thing he could have done at this point. But that would have happened either way. Maruko increased the intensity and was pleasantly surprised to see that he was keeping up, blocking and countering her fighting style. Endeavor was right about this kid. Maruko landed a hard kick to his side, but then had to block a punch and grimaced, feeling the force spread through her bones. They rattled. Izuku wasn't taking her for granted. Knowing that Maruko would feel insulted that way, she was sent flying back to the other side of the room and bounced off the wall to land on her feet. Her eyes widened as Izuku seemed to vanish and was suddenly in front of her, about to land another punch. But her instincts kicked in, and she dodged, and for a brief moment felt slight fear, seeing how he shattered the ground where she was just standing. Holy shit. Is he trying to kill me? She thought to herself, despite her hairs standing on end. She was smiling. This was fun. Izuku again rushed at her, this time using his martial arts knowledge to attack, which was working as she seemed to be on the back foot. They both jumped back and launched towards each other. As their legs collided, Izuku at the last moment grabbed her and flipped them as they crashed onto the hard wooden floor. A few moments had passed, and it seemed he was frozen. Izuku's face was beet red, and his hands trembling. He fell on top of Maruko, and his hands had landed almost comically on her breasts. Suddenly, he felt a hard blow to the side of his head, which knocked him out. A few hours later, from what it seemed, he woke up with a groan. "Ugh, what happened?" He asked. "No one in particular." Looking around, "You got your noggin clocked out?" Another voice answered. He turned to the side to see Maruko sitting with her legs crossed, her hands supporting her head, and with a somewhat annoyed look on her face. Izuku sighed. "Guess I lost then." "Actually, you didn't. As much as it pisses me off, you pretty much fought me to a standstill." "Still can't believe I almost lost to a student," she said, directing the last part to herself. "Really?" he asked, surprised. "Really?" and you impressed me. I must say you've grown since the last time I saw you. I guess I won't mind having you to push around for a while. Izuku raised an eyebrow. Does that mean yes? Stop making me finish your sentences. It's fucking annoying. Right, I'll keep that in mind, he said with a small laugh. Maruko muttered, something incoherent to herself, probably still miffed at how the fight turned out. But that was just round one. They would get plenty more chances to fight later on. Balancing hero work and school wasn't easy. But he and his classmates had to push through it a few months, and they would all officially become pro heroes. Izuku quickly got used to Maruko's style of operation, which was pretty taxing. But that was the reason why he picked her agency. He wanted to do as much as possible, and few heroes out there pushed as hard as her. Though she was surprisingly considerate of his student status, even giving him days off when they weren't plowing through villains. They were either sparring or sparring. Maruko was obsessed with Izuku's strength. And it wasn't every day she got such a strong training partner. It actually gave him a very favorable appearance to her. Maruko was far from the conventional teacher who used training wheels to her. A hands-on approach was the best way to determine if someone was ready for hero work, and Izuku definitely was. He had the power and the mindset. Despite his nice and seemingly pushover personality, he could be very stubborn and as hard-headed as her, which she admired in people. She casually crunched on a carrot, thinking back to a few hours ago, when she had met up with Ryukyu. The dragon hero went on about rewarding people for their good deeds. Maruko, in all honesty, didn't understand that. Well, she did. But that was just inflating their egos, making them think they were hot shit when they were far from it. Still, I guess she has a point though. She said thoughtfully, even if she wanted to reward Midoriya, what exactly could she do? It wasn't like she knew him personally, so she had no idea what he would like. And thinking about it was a hassle. Finishing the carrot, she absent-mindedly picked another one and started to chew on it, her foot tapping softly on the desk. Well, thinking ain't doing shit, screw it, she said, giving up on the matter. There were better things she could be doing right now. Is everything okay, Rumi? Huh? Why do you ask? Maruko responded, turning to her friend secretary. The young woman was quite pretty with light pink hair and magenta eyes. She gave Maruko a weird look. Well, you've been acting a little weird lately, she pointed out. Maruko did know she was acting out, but unfortunately, this was something completely out of her control. She growled a bit in frustration. You can stay at home till it's over. I'm sure, Midoriya, and I can handle things for a few days. Maruko's ear twitched hearing Izuku's name, and her foot began hitting the floor rapidly again. Hiyori, her assistant, giggled a bit, making her glare in her direction. What's so funny? She asked in an annoyed voice. We both know, Rumi. I do suggest that for now you stay away from the boy. Who knows what will happen if you get close to him, Hiyori said with a shrug, leaving her sentence to hang in the air between them. Fuck no, cut it out, Maruko exclaimed, piecing it together. Her foot resumed its rapid assault on the floor, making her turn slightly red in both embarrassment and anger. Fuck her quirks, side effects, fuck biology, fuck life, fuck everything. Please, Rumi, just go home and rest. I won't have you in this condition, working, her friend said in an assertive tone. Fine. Maruko did try, but nothing worked. She was restless and couldn't seem to relax. What exactly was her problem? Well, it had to do with her quirk. And she was right at the start of what would be a very difficult week for her. Her mind kept drifting to her green-haired student sidekick. Now that she thought of it, she really didn't know what Izuku was to her. Thinking of him again, the red tint came back and her foot started moving again. She angrily threw one of her pillows at the wall and then got up. She was going to nip this problem in the bud. So she put on a pair of shorts and a sweater and left her house. Where was she going? She had already informed Nezu of her visit and made her way towards the third-year dorms. Needless to say, Izuku classmates were surprised to see her there, some scared. She looked even more pissed than usual. However, some did notice the small blush on her face, which was pretty cute. Not gonna lie, Minato kept his glee to himself. Even he knew who not to mess with. Where is Midoriya? She asked in a low voice. I think he should be in his room. Is something wrong? Kirishima asked, worried for his friend. No, everything is fine. They watched as she made her way upstairs, and then gave each other looks of confusion. So anyone else think that was weird? Forget weird. Midoriya's such a lucky guy. Imagine a babe like Maruko in my room. I'd die of joy and fulfillment, Minato yelled as his nose bled profusely. Yeah, he's past redemption, Jiro said, not even surprised at his antics. Maruko had reached Izuku's door and paused before slowly knocking. What she was doing was wrong, and it would cause trouble. Wait, why was she thinking something would happen? Oh, Maruko-sensei, what are you doing here? Izuku asked, surprised mind. If I come in first, Maruko said in a surprisingly calm voice that betrayed her outward appearance. Sure. Izuku stepped aside for her to enter. and closed the door behind them. Maruko sat across from him, a moment of silence, and Izuku voiced out his curiosity at Maruko's constant foot tapping. "I'm about to tell you something. And it's a secret. It's not something I'd want to get out. I can trust you, right?" she said suddenly. "I guess what's this secret?" Her foot stopped tapping, and she looked at him with dead seriousness. "I'm horny as fuck." Silence. Izuku blinked. "What?" "I said I'm horny, damn it," she repeated with a growl. Izuku then burst into laughter. "This was the icing on top of the cake. You're really funny. I know you like teasing me, but for you to come all the way here to say this, man, that's commitment," he said, wiping the tears from his eyes. He then quieted down, seeing that she was still serious. "Wait, are you serious?" "I am," she said. Izuku stopped laughing, now inwardly panicking. What the fuck was he supposed to do here? Why would she even tell him something like this? Isn't this sensitive like him? Not supposed to know? Maruko looked down, for once looking cute rather than menacing. "Well, it has to do with you, Izuku," she said as her voice changed tones. He wasn't dumb and was slowly putting the pieces together. It was something he had theorized a while back in his first year, if he remembered correctly. "Is it that time of the month?" he asked. "You know about it well." "Yeah, you're a rabbit, technically. And rabbits have a very high drive," Izuku said with a small blush. This was quite embarrassing for him to talk about. Maruko suddenly pushed him down and slowly crawled on top of him, looking down at him with a cloudy look in her eyes. Izuku didn't budge, but slowly put his hand on her shoulder, shaking her lightly. It seemed she came back to her senses and slowly got off him. Sorry about that. This was the first time she had stuttered over her words. They both sat in silence again. "I take that's why," Harrison said. "I should stay away from you for some time." Izuku asked. Maruko nodded and spoke up. "Look, I'm not someone who likes to keep shit to myself. It's just not in my nature. This urge I have, I thought it was just because you were the only guy around me, so I decided to test it out. I didn't get it anywhere else now that I'm in front of you. I'm seriously trying to restrain myself. So the thing is, I see you as a mate," she said, looking at him. Izuku blinked, then gasped. "A mate, like a life partner? Or what?" "And yes, it's exactly what you're thinking. I'm usually like this for a week, at least, sometimes on the verge of two. So I suggest you take Hira's advice and keep away from me. I may hold myself now, but the week's just starting. It'll get more difficult from here." Izuku breathed out softly, and then, in a surprising display of courage, put his hand on hers. Maruko tensed, but didn't push it off. "I understand, and thank you for telling me about this. And well, about the mate stuff, well, figure it out. I actually have had some feelings for a while," he said with a nervous chuckle. "Why are you telling this to me?" she asked, surprised. "Think of it like a trade. You told me you have an interest in me, and I want you to know I feel the same way," he explained. Maruko smiled a bit and got up. "Thank you for that. Good night." "Good night, Maruko-sensei." Her ear twitched. She turned back to him. "Since it's come to this, why don't you use my actual name?" He wasn't against it and smiled at her. "Good night, Rumi." Maruko nodded and closed the door behind her, feeling much better than before. The students also felt this little change in demeanor. Well, she wasn't scowling. So what happened, they asked themselves, wondering what could make Maruko shift moods like that. Then it hit them. Midoriya. They bolted up to his room, hoping they wouldn't see him dead or paralyzed. But to their surprise, he was completely fine. He chuckled, seeing the looks of worry on their faces. "Disappear, there's no problem. She just came to check up on me. That's all," he said, scratching the back of his head. "Midoriya, you bastard. Mind to calm down." Again. Some time passed and Yue was on the verge of yet another graduation ceremony. The third years had completed their respective courses, and most were now official sidekicks or working under pro heroes. Izuku got quite a surprise towards the last few weeks. All Might was reopening his hero agency, and Izuku would be the one to take over from Gran Torino, who was currently holding the reins till the kid was ready. Truthfully, Izuku really didn't want to deal with paperwork. Not that he'd tell the old man strong as he may be, Gran Torino still found ways to make him fear him. Moving out for him was quite a bittersweet moment. But he had his life to live again. He really couldn't thank All Might enough for everything he had done for him. The man was basically played the role of his father. All Might earlier that year had written down virtually everything in Izuku's name, which bothered him. But an explanation from the hero cleared it up. All Might had no family, and Izuku was the closest thing he had to a son. Their relationship had come full circle from a master and student to son and his father. "Izuku, we better get going. It's almost time for the speech," Ida said, peeping through the curtains. Izuku broke free of his thoughts and turned to his friend. Following him, they made their way into the building. Just as Ida's name was called, "Good luck out there." "Thanks," the boy replied, pushing up his glasses. He was met with a wave of applause and he smiled, seeing his parents and his brother. Good day to you all. I would like to welcome you to this graduation ceremony, and in my last act as the student council president, I would like to thank you all for coming. Our journey at UA was full of challenges, hurdles, and numerous times we were put in situations that could very well ended us. But we pushed through it. We are grateful to each and every staff in this school that made it possible for us to graduate today, and we will make you all proud. Society is still recovering from everything that has happened, and we will make sure we do our part to better it, to uphold the sacrifice of those who fell. Thank you once again to everyone here. Our journey would not have been possible without you. His speech was met with a loud round of applause, and he bowed and left the stage. You did good, Tenya, Aizawa said, patting him on the shoulder. Thank you, Sensei. Damn. It's really over, Kaminari said with a small laugh. Aizawa cleared his throat, gaining their attention. Congratulations to each and every one of you on your graduation. You've all passed through the trials that both this school and the outside world has sent your way. As your teacher, I am proud of you, all of you. However, this isn't the end. You're now pro heroes, so things will only get tougher from here. But I believe that you'll all succeed, so go out there and show the world what you're made of. Yeah. Aizawa smiled to himself, watching them all leave. You sure you're not gonna cry? Present, Mike asked, nudging his friend. Aizawa chuckled and shook his head. Not this time. Izuku met outside with his mother, who was happily talking about something with Mitsuki. Izuku, congratulations, the blonde woman said, pulling the boy in for a hug. Thank you very much. Have you seen Katsuki? He just disappeared, she asked, looking around. Izuku scratched the back of his head. Come to think of it, he hadn't seen him the entire time. Maybe he was hiding to avoid his mother embarrassing him. He didn't look for long though, and to his surprise Katsuki was with. I didn't expect that, Izuku said with a slight smirk. The blonde and his companion turned to him, both with looks of a deer caught in headlights. Guess we're busted then? I would like to think so, Izuku said with a small laugh. Don't tell anyone about this, Izuku, or else, Katsuki growled out, trying to sound intimidating. But the blush on his face didn't really help with that. My lips are sealed. By the way, your mom's been looking for you for a while. Now it was nice meeting you again, Utsushima-san, he said, waving at the two and leaving them to themselves. Izuku found out quite a lot of his classmates were now official. Ochako and Tenya were dating Kirishima, and Minajiru and Kaminari. The last was Shoto and Momo. But those two needed like 50 years before they'd come around and admit that they liked each other. Hopefully, it wouldn't be the case. Yo, Izuku turned, hearing the familiar voice. Rumi. You don't need to crush me so hard, she wheezed out. Oh, sorry. It's just been a while since I last saw you in person, he said, scratching the back of his head. I had some stuff to take care of, but I'm all done now anyways. Congrats on graduating. Thanks. And now that I'm no longer a student, can I finally ask you out? Maruko looked at him with a small smile and nodded, albeit a bit shyly. You don't need to ask me, Izuku. I don't do too well with all this mushy stuff, she said with a fake gag. Izuku chuckled and startled her by taking her hand. I would actually love it if you met my mom as my official girlfriend this time. Maruko smiled and let herself be led to where Inko was. The older woman smiled, seeing them coming towards her. So you finally made it official, ID. Say it was about time, she said with a sigh of relief. I knew it. Another voice cut in, interrupting the moment. Izuku groaned as he turned to see Kaminari, Shiro, and Tenya there. Thank God Minta wasn't there, or all hell would break loose. He was about to speak up, but Maruko beat him to it, grabbing Kaminari by the collar. This dies here, got it? If I hear any rumors, I'm gonna make you regret it. I wasn't gonna tell, I promise. Well then, off you go, she said, releasing him. That was kinda hot, Izuku said to himself, but Maruko's sharp ears picked up on what he said. Weird kink. But she wouldn't judge. You said something, Izuku. No, it's nothing. It had been a whole month since their graduation, and the former students had all started their careers as heroes. Tenya and Ochako opened their own hero agency, which was very quickly gaining popularity. Good for them. Shoto had taken over from Endeavor as the head of his agency, seeing as he had retired a while back. Katsuki was now rising through the popularity polls as the explosion hero. Dynamite Izuku himself was making his own progress, also a bright prospect for the future. Said boy was done for the day and slowly flew to his house. Tired on getting home, the lights were still on. He raised an eyebrow. Rumi took a day off. Weird. Hey, I'm home, Rumi. No reply, but he heard some sounds coming from her room. Rumi opened the door and locked eyes with him. Izuku gulped. Are you okay? He asked worriedly. Her face was red and she was panting. It didn't help his thoughts that she was giving him a funny look. You have no idea what I've had to do to keep myself sane, she growled out. Izuku blushed a bit, knowing that today had become a man. He covered his face with his palm and gently pushed her back into the room, locking the door behind them. What happened? I'll leave up to your imagination. Izuku laid down next to a sleeping Rumi. It had been a few hours, yes hours. His face was beet red. As he thought back to what happened for the past 3 hours, a lot happened. And probably the naughtiest part was when he sighed. One for all was definitely useful. Now more than ever, Momo Yaoyorozu sat looking dejectedly at the floor. Who could really blame her? She had just lost her match in the sports festival, and by quite a landslide. It was so one-sided that it was embarrassing. Tokoyami completely destroyed her, and sure, it wasn't his fault, and he even went through with apologizing to her about it. However, it didn't really help how she felt right now. If he had actually held back just to give her an easier time, she'd probably feel even more insulted. She was weak, and that was the truth. The only thing she had going for her was her book smarts, but compared to the likes of Bakugo, Todoroki, and even Midoriya, she was completely powerless. Aside from academics, there was nothing special or noteworthy about her. Her ears picked up on some movement, and she raised her head, spotting a mop of unruly green hair in the distance. Midoriya. Unknowingly, she called out to him. It seemed he heard her and turned slowly towards her. He didn't think she saw him and was simply going to walk past her. He had a match against Todoroki in a bit, and as cruel as it may have sounded, didn't want someone's burden on him just before a big fight. Plus, it wasn't his business, and it's not like they were really friends to begin with. Okay, maybe he was being a bit too harsh there. He sighed audibly and walked up to her. You called? Momo seemed to be surprised, but she regained herself quickly. Sorry, I must have just blurted that out unknowingly, she said. Izuku looked around, seeing that no one was there, and that his match was not up for a while. Decided to be a hero and possibly help her out. He looked around again and sat down next to the girl. Sorry about what happened, he began. It is fine, Midoriya. I am just disappointed in my performance. That's all, she said in a low voice. Do you want to talk about it? I've heard many times that talking about your problems makes you feel better, and since we're not exactly friends, it'd be no different from taking to a wall, and I won't tell anyone about it. Momo was silent for some few minutes, but Izuku waited for her, sensing that she was probably collecting her thoughts. Honestly, it's pretty depressing to think about. I thought that after everything I was stronger, but I was wrong. Am still weak. I only had my grades to rely on. All this while, so I thought that joining the hero course would help me get stronger, and seeing how everyone in our class improved, I thought that I could as well. Then this happened. Maybe my parents were right. I don't belong in the hero course. Izuku listened with interest and felt bad for her. He wasn't any better, but he noticed that she had confidence issues. Please don't say that, Yaoyorozu. You do belong here, and I know it's disappointing, but the bright side is it can only go up from here. Sorry if that didn't come out right. I'm not good with words, he said, looking down. I understand what you mean, Midoriya, but compared to the likes of you and Bakugo and Todoroki, I'm weak. Izuku turned to her. She considered him strong. This had to be a joke, right? I can agree with the others, but me, I don't think so. Momo suddenly chuckled, startling him. Was it something he said? For someone who's trying to cheer me up, you're quite bad at it, she said. Izuku scratched the back of his head. Sheepishly, she was right. I can't argue with that. But if I helped you let out a bit of frustration, then I think I've done enough, he said, getting up. My match is about to start, so I have to get going again. Don't let the bad thoughts get to you, or you'll basically just be another me. I'll see you around. Yaoyorozu. Momo watched him as he waved and headed to the tunnel at the end of the hallway. She laughed at the little joke he made about himself. He actually did help her feel better. While she wanted to be comforted by her friends, she also knew that none of them would bring up the reason for her feeling down. But with Midoriya, it was a different case. They weren't necessarily friends, so in a way, it was much easier talking to him about it. We're not friends. She chewed on that thought for a while. They were on cordial terms in class, but both she and Midoriya were naturally reserved people, so their interactions were very limited. Even when he was voted as the class president, he quickly gave up the role to Ida. Momo was actually one of the people who voted for him. Out of all the boys, he seemed the most suitable for the role. Some were more on the eccentric side, and not to be rude, weren't necessarily doing well in terms of grades. Then there were others like Todoroki, who was antisocial, and Ida, who was too wound up. Last was Bakugo. The horrors that would happen if he were the class president. Midoriya was the perfect balance of everything. Despite being shy, he could still hold conversations, was one of the smartest students in the class, and was liked by everyone well except for Bakugo. Even Todoroki didn't seem to have any ill intent towards him. On the downside, just like her, he had confidence issues now that she thought of it. They were similar in a lot of ways with all this. Why couldn't they become friends? She shooed her thoughts away when the ground began to shake, indicating that the match had started. Maybe I will talk to him when I get the chance. Few hours later. At least you didn't completely destroy yourself this time. I'd say it's a big improvement from last time. You were here, recovery girl said as she fiddled with some medical equipment. Izuku sat up in the hospital bed and looked down at his arm. Only a few fingers had been casted, unlike last time, when his entire arm was broken. It indeed was a big improvement. There was slight disappointment in his eyes, though he lost to Todoroki, but another part of him was happy that he had shown his classmate the light. He made him to embrace his power and not hold himself down. Still wanted to win, though, he said to himself. Recovery girl stepped out of the office, telling him he was free to go wherever he wanted. He laid back and sighed. The doors opened again, and he thought maybe she forgot something. But it wasn't. Recovery girl Yaoyorozu, what are you doing here? Recovery girl isn't around. Yes, I know that. I actually came to check up on you, she said, taking a seat on an empty chair. Ooh, I appreciate the concern. I'm fine. There was an almost awkward silence between them, both not knowing what to say, seeing as they never really spoke to each other before. I was thinking about what you said. She began, subconsciously twirling the strand of hair in front of her face. I was just encouraging you, Yaoyorozu. I don't think there's much to think about there. No, it's not about that. You said we weren't friends, and you weren't wrong about that. But why not start from here? Izuku looked at her surprised before replying. You mean you want to be my friend? Yes, do you? Not want to? Oh, that's not what I meant. I would also like that, he answered, looking down shyly. I see then. I look forward to getting to know you, Midoriya, Momo said, with a small smile. Likewise. So, when were you planning on leaving? That was more than a year ago. A lot had happened since then. Most importantly, they had now moved up to their 3rd year in UA despite everything that life had thrown at them. There had been a huge war towards the beginning of their 2nd year, a war that affected the lives of everyone. The villains, with All For One as their leader, led a revolt against everything in an attempt to create a new world. Of course, the heroes didn't stand with this and fought back. Many died, including some people dear to them. But at the end, the villains were defeated and All For One vanquished. One thing was clear, though, no one was the same after that. And that was especially the case for Izuku Midoriya. The damage that he sustained mentally was far more than the physical injuries that were inflicted on him. He was frozen with a horrified look on his face. Just the memories of that would bring a wave of sadness over whoever was thinking of it. Hey, yeah, Momo, can you help me out with this question? I don't get it. Momo was pulled out of her thoughts by her friend's question. Oh yes, Jiru. Show me. Jiru raised an eyebrow. She seemed lost in thought mind, saying, what's gotten you so worked up? I was just thinking about all that's happened so far, she said as she read over the question. Jiru sighed. Who could forget? Then there was the Midoriya situation. Izuku no longer had a quirk. He had used it all and gave it up to defeat Shigaraki. Because of the villains, Izuku's hero career was over. They silently went over their assignment, and the bell rang, indicating the end of school for the day. Jiru and Momo packed their things and left the class, noting some of their classmates had already left the school premises. It was a long day. Hey, isn't that Midoriya? Jiru asked, pointing to a mop of green hair exiting the library. Yes, it is. They both waved at him and waited for him to come over. Izuku greeted them with a small smile. Sorry, I have been very busy today, he said, scratching the back of his head. It's fine, dude, we get it, Jiru said, waving off the apology. It's getting a bit cold. Don't you think we should head back to the dorms? Momo said. Momo glanced over at her green-haired friend, who was in his own world of thoughts. He seemed to notice that she was looking at him and turned to her. Anything wrong? No, it's nothing. Izuku could tell she wasn't being honest, as he had come to learn her mannerisms over the last 2 years. But he wouldn't push for an answer, at least not now, despite him losing his quirk. And now being quirkless again, he was still allowed to continue in the hero course. At first, he didn't want to. But after persuasions, he finally gave in. Was a bit of a bummer. But he saved everyone in the end, and he wouldn't have it any other way. It was fun while it lasted, he thought to himself. Later that night, the students of Class 3A were messing around, some studying, some just chilling. Izuku was outside by himself, thinking back on everything that had happened, and about the truth, the identify of the man he knew as Hisashi Midoriya. He was a lie. It was All For One, not Hisashi Midoriya. The man never existed, and was just an alias made by the villain. It was ironic in a way. The son of the man who had thousands of quirks turned out quirkless. What kind of story was that? Izuku, you okay? He turned to see his friend Shoto, who peeped out from the dorms. Yeah, I'm just taking some air out here. Oh, okay, try not to overdo it, Shoto said, and went back inside. He knew what was going on with Izuku, but decided to let him be. In the meantime, Izuku heard the door open again, but didn't turn back to see who it was. Said person sat down next to him and said nothing. Is there something wrong? He asked, breaking the silence. Izuku, are you really okay? I can't say for sure, it's been difficult. But I think I'm doing well, he answered with a small chuckle. I can't imagine what you're going through. And now that you lost one for all, it'll be fine. Momo, All Might said something to me a long time ago. He said there are many ways to help people other than being a hero. Sure, my hero career is over. But I can't let that get me down in the end. Giving up one for all to save everyone was something that I would never regret. And if I was in the position to do it again, I'd still do it. I've played my part. And I honestly won't have it any other way. Momo sighed. I know. But I was looking forward to all of us graduating, becoming heroes. I just didn't expect things to turn out this way. That's life for you, Momo. Things don't go as planned. It may not be desirable, but it's for the best. So after we graduate, what will you do? Izuku paused and thought. He hadn't actually thought of that. He shrugged. Well, cross that bridge when we get to it, Momo huffed. That doesn't sound convincing. I'm sorry about that. Izuku apologized with a small laugh. Momo smiled. Despite everything, he still never lost his smile. He was happy that he saved everyone, and in truth, they all owed him a lot. He was a hero. You've always been like this. Your positivity is amusing, she said. That's where you come in. You basically cancel it out, Izuku countered. Momo punched him on the arm and looked away with a pout that was mean. Izuku chuckled and looked up at the night sky. Say, Izuku, the moon is beautiful tonight, isn't it, ga? Izuku woke up with a jolt and looked around frantically. He was in his dorm room, but for a moment he thought he saw. No, it had to be a dream. He said to himself, it couldn't be. There was no way what he saw was real. But it felt real. He knew how that feeling felt, and despite his thoughts that he was dreaming, his body said otherwise. His hands were trembling, his muscles contracting. What the hell was happening to him? He picked up his phone and checked the time. It was 3:16 am. It was hard going back to sleep as he had the same visions over and over. Eventually he had enough and just waited for day to break. All through the day, he would have small flashes of that same dream, and that familiar feeling would come back. His classmates and teachers took note of his frequent spasms and him suddenly jumping in his seat. Dude, are you okay? You've been all jumpy today, Kirishima asked him. Fine, I just feel funny, Izuku replied, looking at his hands. Suddenly something happened. He saw it briefly, but there was a spark, a very small spark. But he saw it. He wasn't dreaming. He wasn't hallucinating. He suddenly jumped out of his seat and ran out of the class, prompting his teacher to rush after him. And so did his classmates. Izuku ran and ran. He didn't stop running till he had climbed up to the roof of the school. His classmates and teacher, who had lost track of him, gasped as they spotted him on the edge of the roof. What the fuck do you think you're doing up there? Bakugo yelled. Midoriya, get down from there. Aizawa also yelled as he had rushed out, seeing the commotion. Young Midoriya, I know what you're going through is hard, but it doesn't have to end like this. We can still talk this out, All Might added. Izuku looked down at them with a strange look on his face. It wasn't grief, it wasn't sadness. It was more of a questioning look. If I don't jump, I'll never find out if they are just dreams or not, he yelled back. What the fuck, you're gonna kill yourself because of some damn dream? Bakugo cut back. I'll never know, Kachin. It's a leap of faith, that's all it is. Izuku said, as much to their horror. He ran to the opposite side and jumped off the roof. Izuku, there was no one to stop his fall on that side, which was why he tricked them to gathering on one side. They rushed to the other side in fear that he had already hit the ground. But then they heard something. Izuku was laughing. He suddenly flew up from the other side of the building without a scratch, except his hair was roughed up from the excessive wind. I wasn't crazy after all, he yelled as he zoomed over them. He threw his hand forward, and then 5 black tendrils shot out from his hand, grabbing onto a pole and swinging him upward. He repeated this with his left hand, swinging in another direction. Finally, he was done testing whatever he was testing and landed on the floor, the famous green lightning sparking violently around him. It soon vanished, and so did the feeling. Aizawa had activated his quirk, and he was not happy. Problem child, Izuku gulped. Maybe he overdid it. Bakugo bashed him on the back of the head. Don't ever do something like that again. What's wrong with you? Sorry, I may have gotten a bit carried away, he said, scratching the back of his head. More importantly, your quirk, it's back. Uraraka pointed out. So then those dreams you had weren't dreams after all Might said thoughtfully. I don't get paid enough for this. Everyone head back to the dorms. Midoriya, come with us, Aizawa said, rubbing the bridge of his nose. Izuku gulped again, seeing that his teacher's eyes were even redder than they usually were. Sighing, he trudged after them, wondering what punishment awaited him later. He was finally done, and opened the door to the dorms. Most of his classmates were busy doing one thing or another, so he slipped by relatively unnoticed. He was about to enter his room, but heard someone clear their throat. "Hey Momo. What brings you here?" said girl looked like she was about to explode. She growled something incoherent and pushed him into the room, shutting the door behind her rather loudly. It definitely attracted attention. Izuku sat down and looked up to her. She didn't seem too happy, to say the least. "What were you thinking?" "I'm sorry. I just had this feeling all of a sudden, and well, you acted out on your thoughts." "That was extremely irresponsible of you, Izuku. What if those actually were dreams? What if One for All didn't come back? Do you have any idea how that would have affected us or me?" He looked down, feeling bad for making her feel this way. He didn't like seeing her sad. He never did. "I'm really sorry, Momo. I won't do it again." She looked at him, and her eyes, which were previously steeled with anger, softened at him. She couldn't stay mad at him when he got like this. "Just don't act out on impulse, okay?" she said. "Okay." Momo came down and pulled him into a tight hug, which he reciprocated. Izuku rubbed his hand over her back gently, his fingers stroking her soft hair. "I've said this before, but I really can't get over how soft you actually are," Izuku said with a small chuckle. "You dummy, you're always saying things like that," she retorted, pushing him down and kissing him. Izuku melted into the kiss, readjusting his position so she was straddling him. They both pulled away eventually due to the need to breathe. A thin trail of saliva lingered in between their mouths. "What the fuck?" Both of them turned to the door to see that their classmates were there, and they seemed to have seen everything that went down. Bakugo had a red face and was steaming from his ears, growling loudly. Shoto blushed a bit and walked away. "I knew you two were close, but this," Jiru said, covering her own blush. "Hey, we can X Izuku Midoriya and Momo Yaoyorozu. This is a highly brazen display of indecency. I will not let this go by." Ida screamed, red all over and in full class president mode. Izuku grabbed his girlfriend and jumped out the window with an irate Ida in hot pursuit. "Get back here, you horndogs." "Alright class, listen up. I'll be working on this project in pairs, mind you. It will be with Class B, unlike other tests. This isn't by random lots. We've carefully looked over and paired you up with your best fit, though I'm sure some of you would oppose to that. Anyways, it will begin by lunch break and will last the entire month, given the excessive amount of time in my eyes. I won't tolerate half-assed work. Is that understood?" "Yes, sir." Aizawa closed his eyes and nodded. "I'll leave you to it. Then try not to fight too much." The students all took a look at their pairings and their ideal partners. "Oh man, I got Tetsu, bro. That's awesome," Kirishima said with a grin. "Impaired with Kendo." Momo chimed in. "I got Setsuna. Hey Midoriya, who'd you get?" Izuku Midoriya looked down at the name and furrowed his brows in confusion. "Yui Kodai." "Who's that?" he asked. He didn't know of anyone in Class B with that name. Or at least he didn't think he did. "Beats me." "Guess y'all find out soon enough," Uraraka replied. "Yeah, I guess so." During lunch break, each of them took to searching for their partners. Izuku looked around, having absolutely zero idea who his partner was. He yelped as someone spoke up from behind him. It was a girl. "Hello again, Midoriya. It's nice to meet you under normal circumstances." That is, she greeted. Izuku flushed red and stepped back before greeting back. "Likewise. I look forward to working with you." She gave him a curious look and tilted her head slightly, as if trying to get a read on him. He was jumpy. "You don't have to worry about that. It's all in the past. Plus, I was quite intrigued by your physique. Your clothes don't show off anything at all," she said in an almost robotic voice. "You shouldn't say things like that so casually," Izuku said in a harsh whisper. Hoping no one heard what she said again, she tilted her head in confusion. "Why do you say that? Someone will get the wrong idea." "Hey, let's just sit down and talk about our project," he suggested, conceding to her brazen straightforwardness. Certainly, what exactly happened between these two? "Well, flashback. I'm late for training. Sensei is gonna chew me alive," Izuku said in a panic. He had been caught up in something and found out that his classmates had already left for their hero training class. He quickly rushed into the changing rooms and stopped in confusion. There were no labels, so he had no idea which one was for the boys and which was for the girls. "I don't have time for this." He panicked, pulling off his shirt, and decided that he would just change there rather than possibly walk into the girls' changing rooms. As he pulled down his pants, he heard a small sound. It definitely wasn't male. He froze and turned white as if he had seen a ghost. It was a girl, and she was only in her underwear. "Ah!" he screamed and covered his eyes. The girl raised an eyebrow and stopped what she was doing. "Hello. There, are you by chance in class 1A?" As she said that, her bra, which she unclipped, fell off, exposing her breast. Izuku screamed again and turned away. Unknowingly, a streak of blood trailed down his nose. "Yeah, B, but please put on some clothes before asking questions." "Oh, I apologize for this. You see, I was late for a class, and I came in here to change. I didn't know which one was for the boys or girls, so I decided to change out here, she explained. Apparently Izuku wasn't the only one with that idea. He sighed and wiped the blood off his nose. Okay, but please put on some clothes. I apologize for looking at you. Her mouth curled upwards very slightly into a small smile, and she nodded at him. It would've looked cute if her breasts weren't exposed. Izuku looked away again and quietly resumed his changing. It'd just be weird if he moved away now, and he had already seen her, so that deed was done. I don't mind you seeing me like this. Izuku stumbled and fell down. How could she say something like that with so little embarrassment? What I mean is, we are even. You saw me shirtless. And I saw you, she said, finally putting on her gym shirt. You could lead with that, Izuku said with a sigh. I'm done. Goodbye now, she said, and left. Izuku paused and looked at her as she closed the door. What a strange girl. Flashback end. He honestly thought he'd never see her again. But here they were sitting across each other at the lunch table. There was an awkward silence between them. Izuku could tell she wasn't one to speak much, neither was he. But it seemed he would have to be the one to start a conversation between them after they were done eating, of course. So, do you have any ideas how we can go about this? He began. A few, actually. Do you not really? I was thinking we would come up with them together. Oh, I will give my ideas, and we will review them to see which one suits best, she said. Okay, sounds like a plan. Lunch break ended, and the students got up to head back to their respective classes. Midoriya Kodai called as he was about to enter his class. What is it? She pulled out her phone and handed it to him. I would like to have your contact info. Oh, okay. He put his number in and gave it back to her. I will communicate with you after school, she said with a small bow, and left. Midoriya's been up to some shenanigans, Hamina sang from behind him. Izuku sighed, being used to her antics. It's for our project, we're partners. Whatever you say, Midoriya, she hummed and went to her seat. Maybe she was seeing things, but that exchange wasn't what Midoriya was thinking. He'll figure it out eventually, she thought to herself. After school, Izuku and his classmates shared a collective sigh of relief. As the final bell rang, they had their fill of lectures for one day. How about we go play some games at the arcade? Kaminari suggested. and Kirishima and Mineta chimed in. Aren't we supposed to be working on our projects? They are pretty important. As is Tsu asked. All relaxed, Tsu. Deadline's an entire month away. Well, get it done in time, Kaminari replied, waving off her question. Izuku slung his bag over his shoulder and headed towards the gates. Hello again, Midoriya. Ga, he turned seeing Kodai and exhaled. She really needed to stop doing that. He would get a heart attack someday. Hey Kodai, were you waiting for me? He asked. The girl simply nodded in response. Now that you're here, let's go. Okay. He found out they actually lived in the same area. Coincidence. The train ride was relatively silent, though they spoke up when one had an idea. Izuku didn't mind it. It was actually a breath of fresh air. He liked his classmates, but they could be quite a handful. They got off the train and took a small path behind a certain school. Izuku's eyes hardened as they passed the school building, and his companion took notice to that. Your eyes hold hostility towards that school building. Did something happen? She asked in her usual blunt tone. A lot, actually. But it's in the past, he replied. She didn't say anything. He was obviously not comfortable speaking about it, so she would not push it any further. They got to a junction where she stopped. Midoriya, would you like to come to my house? Your house? Didn't they just meet today? He had to give her points for being as blunt as she was. She probably didn't see anything wrong with it. He sighed and conceded sure. Lead the way, she nodded, and he quietly followed her. They finally arrived at her house, and from the car parked outside it looked like at least one of her parents were around. He gulped, mentally steeling himself. This was the first time he was visiting a girl's house in home. And I brought a guest with me, she stated as she and Midoriya entered the house after taking off their shoes. Welcome back, Yui. And who is this? A man who was in the living room asked as he pointed at Midoriya. I see where she gets it from, Izuku thought to himself. Izuku. Midoriya. Sir, I am a classmate of Kodai's, he said with a bow. Huh? Welcome. Then please make yourself comfortable. I will excuse you too, he said, getting up and leaving. Izuku wiped some sweat off his forehead. The man had an icy aura around him. Scary. Another voice came into the room. This time it was far more energetic. Oh, hi there. I see Yui brought home a friend, and a cute one at that. Izuku's eyes widened in shock. The woman was an exact replica of the girl standing next to him. It was like looking at Kodai, but the only difference was that she was slightly older, even scarier than her dad. Mom, please, don't tease him. Forgive my mother, Midoriya, Kodai said in an apologetic tone. It's fine, I don't mind. I'm kind of used to being teased, he said, scratching the back of his head. Kodai's mother tilted her head in an eerily similar way to her daughter. showing her curiosity. She soon snapped out of it and smiled at him. "Where are my manners, Miyuki Kodaiui's mother?" "It's nice to meet you. It's nice to meet you too, Mom. I am Izuku Midoriya," he said, bowing. "We have a project we will be working on, so you'll be seeing him here often," Kodai stated. Izuku's sweat dropped at her tone. He had a hard time guessing who was the mother here. "That's fine with me, and your dad also doesn't mind. I look forward to getting to know you better, Izuku," she said with a mischievous glint in her eyes. Izuku couldn't help but blush slightly at the attention. Kodai didn't seem to react. But her mother knew better. She didn't like what she was seeing. Her lips curled up into a smirk as she whispered to her daughter, "Are you jealous, Yui?" "Nothing of the sort, Mom," she answered a bit too quickly. Though it's not like Izuku could tell. Yuki giggled and walked away. "I'll leave you two to it. Then have fun." Izuku sighed. Seeing someone who looked exactly like his classmate with an exact opposite demeanor was somewhat overwhelming. He subconsciously glanced over at her. "And she noticed. Do you perhaps like energetic girls, Midoriya?" He facepalmed at this point. He wasn't sure whether to be scared or impressed at how casually she said some things. Izuku had spent a good chunk of his time after school with his partner, and actually didn't mind. It was surprisingly fun. He found out she was a huge fan of Ultraman, which he also was. Contrary to what most would think about her, she wasn't boring. It was the opposite, actually. She could be downright hilarious. He shook his head of his thoughts to focus on his test. It wasn't really hard for him, so he had the liberty of zoning out from time to time. That wasn't quite the case for some of his classmates, though. He wasn't being cocky, but he was pretty sure he aced the test, though he'll have to wait for the results to come out before he would see the day ended. And it was time to head home. He came out expecting a jump scare. Was it really one when he knew it was coming? Sure enough, it happened. Though he was pretty used to it by now, so he didn't jump. "Hey Kodai, how was the test?" "It was fine. The points you gave me really helped, so thank you for that," she said with a small bow. Though he could have sworn he heard a bit of disappointment in her voice. Maybe he was just tired or not, because she confirmed his suspicions. "I was actually hoping to see you jump like you used to." His sweat dropped. Seriously, was it some sort of game she liked playing? "Sorry, I'm used to it already," he said, scratching the back of his head. She didn't show any outward reaction, or at least not if you didn't look closely. Her mouth twitched upwards in a small smile. "Would you like to accompany me to an arcade?" Izuku blinked and turned around as if she was talking to someone else. "You mean me?" "There's no one here but you, Midoriya," she stated plainly. "Oh, I'd like that." She nodded and began to walk with him, matching her steps from the floor where class 1 was. Mina looked down at the two of them with a small smile. "Midoriya really is dense." Izuku, meanwhile, wasn't as dense as Mina was thinking. At least he could figure out that this technically was a date. They weren't doing anything project-related or school-related. They were just hanging out at the arcade. And he liked that. Kodai was different when she was around things. She liked you could see the energy she had behind her natural poker face, and in many ways she was similar to her mom. Speaking of her, Izuku was now like a mouse when she was around. She always found a way to surpass even the likes of Mina. When it came to teasing him, they stopped in front of her house, and she turned to him. "Thank you for going out with me, Midoriya," Kodai said with a small bow. "You don't have to be so formal with me, though I have to ask, there's a reason for this, right?" She nodded. "Project deadline is tomorrow. This is our last day as partners, so I thought that we should at least make a memory together." Izuku saw that she looked sad after saying this. Mind you, to others her facial expression didn't change, but being around her for that amount of time, he could tell you just assumed that we'd go back to being strangers. Izuku asked with a raised eyebrow. "Well, yes, I don't think I'm fun enough to be around, simply put," she stated. Izuku looked down, thinking of what to say. But then he discarded it. There wasn't anything to think about. "I do see you as a friend over the time we've worked on this project. I came to see you as one, so please don't jump into the conclusion that I was being nice to you, because I was forced to. The time we spent together was something I enjoyed, so if you're up for it, we can be friends." Kodai's eyes widened ever so slightly, and she brought her head down. "Okay, hope I'm not interrupting something," her mother said as she appeared from behind them. "Good evening, Mom," Izuku greeted. "Hi there, Izuku. So did you two go on a date or something?" she asked, tilting her head to the side. Izuku scratched the back of his head sheepishly and chuckled. Yuki smiled and patted him on the back. "I'll leave you two to it. Then I should get going now. My mom will be getting worried," Izuku said, and began to leave. Midoriya, Kodai called him uncharacteristically. She smiled at him, an actual smile. "I look forward to being friends with you." Izuku had a small streak of red splash over his face. She looked so cute right now. "Yeah, same here." He walked back to his house in stunned silence. "I didn't expect that." The very next day, they all turned in their projects, Some obviously more prepared than others. Aizawa and Vlad King took the roll call and recorded their results. After going through them, some impressed them, and some, well, they didn't really want to talk about it. Izuku and Kodai's team got in, which was a feat on its own. Seeing as Aizawa was a hard man to please, he was pretty happy with their score and happily went through the day's classes. During lunch, he sat down with his friends who were discussing about their project grades. Well done, Midoriya. An A is quite impressive. You and Kodai must have gone above and beyond. Ida said. Yeah, congratulations, Uraraka chimed in. Shoto made a small sound of agreement, and Izuku smiled sheepishly. They were greeted by a surprising guest. Hello, Kodai. It's quite a surprise seeing you here, Ida greeted. It's nice to meet you all again. Is it okay if I sit here? She asked. Sure you can, Uraraka replied with a bright smile. Kodai put down her tray and sat down to the left of Izuku, seeing as Uraraka was at his right. They talked a bit after eating and headed back to their respective classes. I will see you after school, she waved and left for her class. Yes, see you later, Izuku waved back. Kodai walked into her class and was met at the door by Monoma. Why have you been associating with class 𝗧𝗵𝗲? Don't you know we're rivals? Kodai didn't budge under his burning gaze, but calmly answered. Midoriya is my friend, so I do not see what is wrong with that. Huh, friend? Monoma screamed in outrage. Yes, friend. Do you have a problem with that? She asked. Fuck. Yeah, class are all scum ass, especially people like Midoriya. He's all nice and friendly on the outside, but deep down he looks down on us all. Can't you see? Open your eyes. Kendo was about to knock him out, but stopped. Kodai's usually stoic expression was replaced by a visible frown. Monoma's words didn't please her, especially about Midoriya. I don't know what to feel. Ashamed of being in the same class as you, or sad at your obvious inferior complex. You're the embodiment of everything you hate about class. Maybe if you would fix yourself first, then you would stand a chance of making it there. But as far as you're still like this, you'll always be a side character. Her cold stoic demeanor came back as she said what was on her mind. It was terrifying how she would say such things without batting an eye at the harshness, though Monoma was being a dick, so he deserved it this time. Said boy was shocked and couldn't bring out any more words from his mouth. She just hit him in a very sensitive spot. Vlad King entered the class before any more words could be said, so they both quietly went to their seats. You really let him have it. That was brutal, Setsuna whispered. He deserved it, Kodai stated plainly. Needless to say, Monoma didn't bother her anymore that day. She really just wanted the day to be over. They had done a lot that day, and she wanted to get away from all of it. Lucky for her, time seemed to listen to her wishes. As the day came to an end, students took their stuff and bolted out the door. Kodai did so without the bolting and saw Midoriya waiting just outside their class. She smiled a bit and walked towards him. He seemed deep in thought. She tapped him on the shoulder, bringing him out of his thoughts. What were you thinking about, Monoma? He gave me a funny look when he walked past me. Did something happen? Kodai frowned a bit. He insulted you and your classmates, so I retaliated, she stated. Izuku could sense the smugness oozing off her and chuckled. I just hope you didn't say anything too harsh. He already hates us. As is, I don't think he can hate us more. Never mind him. Do you want to go somewhere? You've gotten yourself banged up, but nowhere near how it used to be. Impressed, Izuku looked down to his arms and was in a way satisfied that he had limited the damage to just 2 fingers. His training with One for All was paying off. The doors slid open and Kodai walked in. She greeted Recovery Girl and sat down next to the bed. Okay? I only broke my fingers this time, Izuku began. You make that sound like a good thing. It's still damage regardless, she said in a slightly scolding tone. Sorry. I haven't gotten full control of my quirk yet, Izuku apologized. Not mad, just concerned and curious. Curious about what your quirk? It doesn't seem like it suits your body. Or rather, it seems like your body is still adjusting to it. People's bodies tend to already be configured to work with their quirks. But you're an exception, so I came up with 2 theories. One is that you were a late bloomer because your quirk is too powerful to handle, and 2, it's not actually your quirk, but someone else's. The room became heavy with tension as even Recovery Girl stopped what she was doing and turned to the girl with a shocked expression. Did she figure it out? That's crazy talk. Why would you think it's not my quirk? Izuku countered, mentally panicking. Kodai narrowed her eyes at his reaction, but then gave up. It did sound outrageous to begin with. I guess I jumped to conclusions too quickly. Sorry about that. It's fine. I was just caught off guard. And yes, I was a late bloomer, so that's why my quirk isn't under control. The first time I used it, I ended up shattering my arm and both my legs, Izuku said, and winced at the memory. I can't imagine that kind of pain. Recovery Girl chimed in to bury any underlying questions regarding Izuku's quirk. Look at the time, you better get going, you two. I'm about to lock up this place. Izuku took the cue and played along, packing his stuff and heading out with his friend. Let's do better next time, Kodai spoke up. Yeah, I'm aiming to win next time at the sports festival. After the sports festival came a string of events that the students had to face. Some they were prepared for, others not so really, from the internships to the final exams and up to the forest training camp, where they were attacked again, this time with one of their classmates being captured. Katsuki Bakugo, the heroes, made plans to rescue him. And unknowingly, some students actually made plans of their own. However, Izuku was in a pickle. He was going, but only out of his heroic spirit, no personal feelings involved, because he had now come to resent his blonde classmate and former bully. It didn't sound right, but that was what it was, and who could blame him? Bakugo was terrible to him. Despite the two of them being friends when they were younger, he let his quirk get to him, and he turned into something else. It took some convincing from Kirishima to get him on board, but he took the same stance as Ida on the matter. At the very sight of the villains they would leave. Their little plan thankfully worked out in the end, but that was due to All Might's intervention, and Bakugo was rescued. Then there a huge fight between All Might and the leader of the villain world, the greatest and most powerful villain in history. All for one, it ended with All Might's victory. But at the cost of his power, he used up the last embers of One for All to defeat his adversary, revealing his true form to the whole world. It was a bittersweet victory. They were safe, but it meant that All Might would no longer be a hero. After all that came the tedious task of convincing parents to let their children into U.S. custody. A new dorm system was erected to prevent the frequent villain attacks on the students, and after a while they all moved in. Now they looked to the next big event, the provisional hero license exam. They were going to compete with other schools, and by now each member of that class had some publicity. Most of their competition knew what their quirks were, but they fought through it regardless, all passing. But two, Katsuki Bakugo and Shoto Todoroki. The blonde was fuming with rage as he glared at the others who were celebrating and showing off. His eyes drifted to Izuku, who was with his friends. The anger in him reached a boiling point. Since when was Deku better than him? He was always beneath him, so why was he getting so much stronger? He was silent through the entire day, until late in the evening, when the class were all gathered in the common area. Come with me, he said, walking past Izuku and heading for the door. To where exactly? Izuku asked. I said come with me, Not saying it again, Bakugo growled out, the anger evident in his voice. Izuku looked at him worriedly, but decided to do as he said, knowing Bakugo. It was probably something to do with the license exam. They walked out of the dorms and into one of the mock cities that they used for training. What are we doing here? Izuku asked, taking in his surroundings. This was the place where I first lost to you. Bakugo began. Izuku narrowed his eyes. Bakugo wasn't planning on fighting. Was he? My question is why did you get so much stronger? Why didn't you stay under me? Why would I lose to someone like you? What are you talking about? Izuku asked, taking a step back. Bakugo's palms were already glowing red. I want you to fight me right here, right now. Let's settle this once and for all. Izuku began to regret ever following him out here. He should have known better. But in a way it would have been worse. If he didn't comply, I'm not going to fight you. You don't have a choice. I'm gonna pummel you until you fight back. Bakugo launched himself at Izuku, who dodged the explosion and rolled to the side. What's wrong with you? I told you this is a fight. Kodai knocked on the one a dorm and walked in, looking around for her green-haired friend. Ida spotted her. Greetings, Kodai. Are you looking for someone? Yes, I came here to see Midoriya. Is he perhaps sleeping already? She asked in her usual tone. He and Bakugo headed out somewhere. Not sure what they are up to, Kaminari said, absent-mindedly picking his teeth. Bakugo and Midoriya? Kodai asked with a raised eyebrow. Yup. I think they are at one of the training grounds or something, the yellow-haired boy replied. Kodai's eyes widened slightly. Did they not see what was going on? She heard that Bakugo was one of the students that failed, and knowing his rocky relationship with Midoriya, it wasn't hard to figure out what would happen. And you don't think anything is going to happen? She asked again. Nah. Bakugo's all talk. I don't think he'd actually do anything to Midoriya. Kirishima answered. Their conversation was interrupted by a loud explosion in the distance. Kodai got up and headed for the door. Ida, contact your teacher. I'm going to look for them. They were surprised that she raised her voice. It was the first time they heard any emotions from her. I hope I'm not too late. Izuku was panting as he looked back at his classmate, who had broken down. You're the one who's making it unbearable for me. Someone who used to be insignificant is now All Might's favorite. And I was the one who ended him. I ended All Might's career, Bakugo yelled as his eyes were watery with tears. It all snapped for Izuku. What the fuck did Bakugo think he was? I'm done with this. The green lightning around Izuku increased significantly. and was now violently sparking around his body 1 for all 25. He moved towards Bakugo at a speed that the blonde was not prepared for, and clocked him clean on the nose, sending him flying through the wall behind him. He wasn't done. All the memories of everything this boy had done to him, they came flooding back. Bakugo didn't know what to do. He was getting ping-ponged around, thrown and slammed back down into the ground. When he tried to fight back, his attacks landed. But Izuku was in full attack mode. He didn't even try to block anything. Another hard kick to his gut sent him to his knees. He looked up in disbelief at his opponent. Izuku's eyes were glowing an ominous green. "I've had enough of you, Bakugo. I tried to move on. But you never let me. I tried to forget everything. But you didn't let me. All those years you bullied me, all because I was quirkless at the time. I wondered what I did to you to deserve such. Even when I got into UA, I thought you would finally acknowledge me, or at least leave me alone, but screw that. I'm done with you. Don't ever get in my way again." He kicked Bakugo at full power, sending him tumbling across the hard cement floor. He was about to move again, but someone grabbed his hand. "Izuku, that's enough." That voice. It could only be one person. Kodai. The girl smiled at him and shook her head in disapproval. "If you go through with this, you'll be no different from him. It's not worth it." Izuku's tears began to pour. It was too much for him. This frustration he let out was just a fraction of what he was holding back. But it felt like a weight was lifted from him. Kodai didn't say anything, just silently comforting the crying boy. Aizawa and All Might came rushing to the scene and gasped. Bakugo was unconscious, bleeding, and obviously very hurt, and Izuku was crying hurt, but nowhere near Bakugo. "What happened here?" Aizawa asked with a scowl. Kodai explained the situation to them, and both men sighed deep down. They knew a day like this would come. The animosity between these two was simply too much. Izuku got up and looked at his teachers seriously. "I know what we did was wrong, and I will accept whatever punishment you will give me. But let's make one thing clear here, I'm not apologizing." They were both taken aback by how he sounded right now. The anger in his voice was evident. Whatever happened to make Izuku like this had to be something. Aizawa nodded and instructed him to go with All Might, while he tended to Bakugo. "Thank you, Kodai. If you hadn't shown up, I don't know what would have happened here. You're past curfew. But I'll call your teacher and explain the situation. Please head back to your dorm." "Thank you, Mr. Aizawa," she said with a small bow, and left young Midoriya. "What really happened to make you like this?" All Might asked. He had never seen his successor look like this before, and it was alarming. "It's a long story, All Might. It's not something I can say here," Izuku answered, looking at the ground. The news was passed to Class 1A, and needless to say they were shocked, some more than others. Some people like Todoroki and Momo knew it would come at some point. Izuku was a nice person, but there was only so much a person could take before snapping. Izuku was put on house arrest for 3 days, because as the cameras showed, he didn't initiate the fight. Bakugo was a different story. He had to be taken to Recovery Girl. He had sustained quite some damage: a broken nose, 4 broken ribs, a dislocated shoulder, and severe bruises on his skin. It was hard to believe that Izuku was the one who caused this. "When you're done with the boys' side, you can go ahead with the girls' side. I trust you, so that's okay. With that aside, I'll leave you to it." Momo said. "I understand," Izuku said, and began his chores. "Midoriya, what is it? For what it's worth, I'm sorry about all this. Please know that I'm on your side in this. It's fine, Yaoyorozu. You're just doing your job. Have a nice day," Izuku said with a small smile. "You too." 4 days later. Midoriya, it's good to have you back with us," Ida said, albeit in a hoarse voice. Did something happen?" "Yes, we had an interaction with the Big Three yesterday, and I'm still feeling the effects of it," the boy explained. Izuku sighed. He missed something, but they explained the work-study program. It did sound better than internships, more hero work to do. He wasn't sure where he'd go, seeing as Gran Torino was too busy lately. "It's the green-haired freak." An annoying voice cut in. "Monoma, why are you insulting Midoriya?" Ida asked in an annoyed tone. "Why, isn't it obvious? I was always right about people like him. And here I was thinking that Bakugo was bad. He's even worse. He sent Bakugo of all people to the fucking hospital. And now he's here with his half-assed nice guy act. You won't fool anyone anymore, bastard. We know your true colors. This just proves my point, class." At our all school, he was cut short as Izuku had grabbed him by the collar, the anger visible in his eyes. But he calmed down quickly. "Look, that is a sensitive subject for me. You have no idea what I've gone through in his hands. So please, for your own sake, don't say anything else. I don't want to get in trouble any more than I already did." It wasn't aggressive, but it was definitely a warning to the blonde. He stepped back in shock and slight fear. Then he chuckled, thinking he'd just rile him up more and have him get into trouble. But he was knocked out by Kendo. "I'm very sorry for this, Midoriya. I know he's annoying, but he doesn't speak for the rest of us. she said, dragging his body away. Izuku exhaled and sat back down, looking at his friends who were staring at him wide-eyed. What, you wouldn't normally just handle someone like that, Todoroki pointed out. I am still not over what happened. Sorry for that outburst. He apologized. No problem, Midoriya. I'm sure I would've done the same thing. If it were me, we are only human after all, Ida said, pushing up his glasses. Yeah, don't sweat it, Deku. Monoma's a jerk. Izuku smiled. But inwardly he was doing the opposite. He was changing. And he didn't necessarily like the direction of his change. War in Japan between heroes and villains. Shigaraki and All for One had waged war against everyone and everything. Thousands of people were affected, cities destroyed. And in a way the heroes lost the fight. There was chaos in the country. All over, criminals ran rampart, doing as they pleased. The hero forces were dwindled and weak, and couldn't stop them. Most of the damage was done by prison breakouts. Izuku Midoriya had taken the issue for himself, leaving Yua to find All for One and Shigaraki. But at the cost of his own safety. If he remained with his friends, they would be targeted as well. And he couldn't bring himself to put their lives in danger. His classmates, however, didn't want to be saved, and wanted to help him in the fight against the villains. They now knew the truth about his quirk, and went after him to bring him back. At the end, Kodai, who had gone along with them, convinced him to stop fighting alone, and their mission was complete. Izuku was brought back to Yua, and with persuasion, let in. I'm sorry for all the trouble I caused you, he apologized. We understand it was scary, but we're all heroes. We want to fight with you, not watch you do it all alone, Todoroki said. Most agreed with him, and they came to some sort of closure. Izuku and Bakugo buried the hatchet, and came to a resolution. Bakugo apologized, and truly he had come to regret his actions. Izuku wanted to move on from everything, and decided that it was all in the past. Now they had bigger obstacles ahead of them. He made his way towards the B-class dorms, and entered. Yo, Midoriya, what's up, man? Tetsu greeted. Hey, Tetsu. Is Yui in? Nope. She stepped out a few minutes ago. Don't know where, but it shouldn't be far. Oh, okay, I'll go look for her, Izuku said and left. While he was looking for her, he saw how filled the US shelter was, and it just showed how much damage had been done. This many people displaced because of All for One. It steeled his resolve to defeat him, so they could all go back to living normal lives. Izuku ga. He stumbled, but his hand was caught, stopping him from falling. It was Yui. She tilted her head and smirked at him. I got you this time. That's not fair, he said with a sigh. That's the point, isn't it? I won't tell you when I'm going to jump scare you, she said in an amused tone. Her hands are so soft, he thought, and blushed slightly at the contact. I was looking for you, actually, to thank you for everything, and to say sorry for making you go through so much to bring me back. With her free hand, she poked him on the forehead. It wasn't any trouble for me. I'm just happy you're back. So, are you going to let go of my hand anytime soon? He asked, pointing out the obvious. Yui smiled and shook her head. No. I plan on holding Izuku's hand as long as I can. Izuku blushed a bit and looked away, smiling to himself. Okay, then Yui. They both headed back to the dorms, still holding hands, but neither said anything. If anyone saw them like this, so be it. Then a thought flashed through Izuku's mind. A bunch of them, actually. His initial interactions with her, he didn't notice anything. But now that he was used to her, he started putting the pieces together. There was a hint of denial. It wasn't like that, right? Yui. I have a question to ask you, Izuku began. What is it? He stopped and turned to face her, red-faced but serious. Do you have feelings for me? There was a brief moment of silence, and part of him was screaming at how he would just ask something like that out of the blue. But then her face lit up, and she gave him a toothy grin. You caught me.